What's the best or worst thing a garbage collector found in the trash? Oh boy, my time to shine! I've been working at a waste transfer station, I guess you'd call it a garbage dump, for many years. The worst I've seen, just garbage, not counting stuff brought to the hazmat department, was a freezer stuffed with skinned, rotting, headless deer carcasses. We nearly called the cops before we realized it wasn't human. Also a lot of used syringes. The worst being a tie between a porcupine couch and the lady who literally handed me a paper bag full of syringes she had found during a park cleanup. There was also the large container of old crystallized picric acid. We had to call in the bomb squad to deal with that one. Some of the best were a high-end laptop in perfect condition except for a tiny crack on the LCD panel. Easy DIY repair that took $40 and 5 minutes. That thing would have cost $1.5 grand brand new. Also enough brand new furniture to literally furnish my whole apartment, as well as a high-end military-grade inflatable boat, brand new. And then some of the weird things. A first-generation platelet counting machine complete with weird tubes of bright green liquid and mercury. When I was prepping it for hazmat disposal, I had to call the company that bought the company that made it for some info. They never digitized the records, but the oldest repair tech still working was super excited because he remembered servicing them 50 years ago. And a coffin. No body, just a coffin. Couldn't see anything wrong with it either. There were also buckets of testes from a ranch that had been sitting out in the summer heat for a week. It smelled so bad that my coworker blew chunks, and that's not even the weirdest part. The weird part is the guys wanted their bucket back. Like, do you know how bad it has to smell to make a garbage collector throw up? And they wanted them back. There was also a $10,000 duffel bag. A lady came in super upset because earlier she threw out said duffel bag and she didn't know her boyfriend kept cash in it. Over 10 grand in cash. We never found the bag, or at least I never did. Then there was the 16 full-size barrels of old vegetable grease that some guy had saved up in his garage. He was planning to make a biodiesel car or something. A lot of people are asking me if we get to keep stuff. Officially, no. It's not against the law as far as I know, except for illegal stuff like substances, but it is against our policy. However, workers do salvage things. As long as it's discreet and they're not selling it, management doesn't really get involved. Selling stuff is a big no-no. We don't fight over the stuff. In fact, we'll keep an eye out for things colleagues might need. Most of what we salvage is actually tools and stuff that we use at the dump. I've also started a management-approved program to give away free household products that would otherwise be hazardous waste, like paint, oil, cleaners, stuff like that. Some dumps also run thrift stores to divert materials from landfill, but we don't have the space. I'm just glad that some people, in what could be a thankless job where you see a lot of wastage, go to so much trouble to try and put some of the stuff back into circulation. Working at a dump seems quite taxing to me, so having the energy to organize all the extra reusing of things seems superhuman, to be honest. My father was a garbage man, who also was a trash collector, and who also did cleanouts for homes and businesses where they'd rip apart the entire building and throw everything out in their dumpsters. He worked on a ton of really massive houses, some worth tens of millions of dollars. One of them was worth $40 million and wasn't even the permanent residence of this family. The best things I got as a kid? Pretty much an unused trampoline with a net and everything, closely followed by a go-kart that my dad's friend was able to fix up and that we used all the time. I lived in a cul-de-sac. And one time he cleaned out a deli that was closing down and we no joke had unlimited Snapples and sodas of every flavor for almost a year. I'd drink the Snapples while out on my trampoline. I used the hell out of all three of those things in my childhood. We sometimes have to do house clearances at work, mostly for dead people with no family and the house is to be sold. Lots of the time, stuff just isn't worth the time it takes to sell it, so we get to keep stuff that's going to be thrown out. I've gotten so much fabric, embroidery thread, all sorts of sewing and dressmaking materials. I'll never have to buy another button in my lifetime. I like to think the old ladies it used to belong to would be glad to know it's going to be used. I was a garbage man for a few years, and on one of those trucks it had a grapple arm that came out of the side of the truck and grabs the bin, lifts and dumps it. There are 3 cameras on the truck, 2 to see the bin and to help you line it up, grab a hold of it and then switch to another camera view as you dump the bin out, and you could see the trash fall out. Well, one day I was doing my run, grabbed a trash bin, picked it up, dumped it, and out fall a bunch of mannequin parts. I nearly crapped myself thinking a serial killer dismembered somebody and put them in the trash. In the 80s, I picked up a number of Philips color TVs. I had a few, so fixing them was just a question of swapping parts. I then sold them cheaply or gave them away to fellow students. My father was a garbage man when I was born. I don't remember because I was like 3 months old, but my first dog was in the trash. My dad stopped, picked up a box and heard something shuffling around in the inside, and there were 2 puppies. My dad kept one and the driver kept the other. They were brother and sister, my dad assumed, and he kept the male and named him Jasper. Jasper was my best friend growing up. I had him for 13 years, and my dad tells me the job was worth it just for that dog. He called the police and animal control on the residents, but doesn't know what happened after that. All I know is I'm 37 and I still love that dog so much. I'm so thankful my dad saved him and his sister. My little brother was emptying out a client's basement and everything was going to be thrown away, so my brother was told to keep anything he wanted. He saw a nice-looking bike and took it. Turns out it was a Dahunmu P8 30th Anniversary Limited Edition and in perfect condition. From what I found on it, it goes for over $4,000. I worked as a garbage man in 1972. A small stray cat jumped onto the back of the hopper to look for food. I took him home and named him Saigon. This was the best thing. Second best thing someone threw out was an old pair of skis. There was snow on the ground, and me and the other guy each took a ski and stood on it and held on to the back of the truck. Great fun. The third best we found was an entire case of Brill cream. Look it up. And me and the other guy had Brill cream fights all day. Total mess. I had to take off all my clothes before going into my house after work. The worst thing we ever found was a garbage can that had live coals in it that started our truck on fire. Not me, but my brother. Someone apparently threw out Grandpa's stuff from the attic after he passed away. This was the last scheduled pickup at the house and everything was already moved out. Nobody lived there. Driving a truck with an automated claw to grab and dump, my brother was irritated there were these 2 bowling bags he had to get out to throw in the truck. He realized that they seemed a bit heavy, so he opened them to see why. Inside there was real silverware and flatware. He ended up selling it for scrap pieces to a jeweler and got $3,000. My dad was a trash man when I was growing up. He'd always be bringing cool stuff home to us. He always used to say that the poorer neighborhoods had the most trash, and they threw away literally everything. The 2 best ones I can think of was a brand new BMX bike and like 20 Nintendo 64 games that he found at a video rental store. Also, once at the transfer station, one of his co-workers found a dummy arm in the big pile of trash. He pulled it and it ended up being a dead guy. The police later determined that it was a homeless person that got picked up and died when the trash truck compacted him. It happens semi-frequently. Homeless person climbs into a dumpster to shelter from the rain or the cold. They're wasted because you'd have to be to sleep in that smell, so when the truck comes to pick it up, they don't hear them. By the time they do wake up, the noise is too loud to hear any shouting and they get crushed. I'd imagine the guys check the dumpsters before picking them up with the truck, but sometimes they might cover themselves with garbage bags or old blankets, so on a quick inspection, they're not spotted. We had an incident last year where the council was using a large arm and claw to remove abandoned tents along a canal. There was a guy going ahead of the machine to check the tents to make sure there was no one in them and no obvious valuables in them. It's not entirely clear what happened. Maybe there was a delay between the check and lift. But anyway, one guy got into his tent and the claw came and picked him up. He survived, if I recall correctly. Good lord. I don't care what walk of life you're on, being hoisted up by a gigantic claw arm like the Toy Story one and dumped into a crusher is just one of the most left-field, horrifying ways to get killed or injured. In the early 2000s, my best friend's dad was a garbage man. I used to hang out at their house a lot, and I remember him finding uncut sheets of holographic Dragon Ball Z trading cards in the trash and bringing them back. They were super dope to see. Would the uncut sheets increase their value, or would them being in the trash decrease their value? Okay, toy collector here. These kinds of things are extremely difficult to assign a value to. They're both extremely rare and in atypical condition. It would be a very hard sell, but if you found the right buyer, they could be worth quite a lot. This is the sort of thing that would probably be best unloaded at an auction, which is where the rare oddities go. The fact that they were in a dumpster probably wouldn't affect the value very much unless they were completely trashed, because that's about the only place you'd ever find them. Condition is always a factor in valuation, but most collectors understand that sometimes you've just got to take what you can get. Then there's also the potential for lawsuits from the creators for selling unauthorized merchandise. It's unlikely, but it could happen, depending on how much they care about copyrights and how much he made selling something they consider trash. So yeah, the potential for high value is there, but you'd have to pitch these items and generate the interest yourself, and then risk toy company lawyers coming after you. Not worth it in my opinion, but I'm sure someone out there would be crazy enough to try. Elaine Cedar Chest. I was helping my dad clean out this lady's garage, and she said as long as we were there, we might as well take that too. She said she always hated the smell of cedar, but her husband wouldn't let her get rid of it, and now that he was dead, she was sending it on its way. The veneer was never in great shape, but it still keeps my wool items safe. I've had it for over 30 years now. I once scored a whole custom-built staircase from a dumpster. It was in perfect condition, but apparently built to the wrong spec for the house. It worked great for my barn. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I found a 55-inch TV next to the dumpster 4 years ago. It was missing one HDMI port on the side. It looked like someone might have tripped and ripped it out. Anyway, I opened it up, googled the motherboard serial number, and found a brand new replacement for like $60, less than 25 minutes away. Needless to say, I called ahead on my day off, picked it up, and it works like a charm. Still use the TV to this day. A 55-inch Sony 212 LCD TV. I have Chromecast with Google TV hooked up to it now, and it's awesome. 2021 and still going strong. I work in the scrap metal business and have found not one, but 2 of the exact same brass statues of 2 bears screwing each other. When I was a kid, I found a couch. It wasn't very big, but that's why it was so great. 10-year-old me was able to carry it all the way home by myself, about a block and a half. This was before kids having cell phones was a thing, so I didn't call my parents about it first, and they were at the store anyway. So I took the couch home and put it in my room. My downstairs neighbor helped me. It was pretty dated, made of some material I've never encountered again, but I thought it was awesome. I had a whole couch in my room. How many 10-year-olds had couches in their room? Well, my parents came home and clearly weren't happy, but given I carried it up to the second story and got it into my room, they let me keep it. I felt like a king. I had a couch, I had a big box TV for my PlayStation, I had it all. They were simpler times. My friend found a PlayStation 4 in excellent condition and a brand new controller still in the box at the dump. So, Mum had had enough of her teens crap, in other words. I live in a large apartment complex. I could have furnished multiple apartments with all the stuff that gets thrown out here, and I've partially furnished mine. But the best thing I've seen in the pile was one of those grandfather clocks you can make from a kit. It still looks very nice, but it needed some fixing to get it running again. I'm still waiting to find a piano. I'd like a piano. When I was growing up, my neighbor worked at the local council. One night he knocked on the door trying to rehome a couple of kittens that one of the workers had apparently found at the local tip. All I remember was this absolute giant of a man, normally the most calm and chill person I've ever met, absolutely seething with anger, while holding a tiny ginger and white kitten in one of his hands. My guess is that someone had dropped off a box of them, hoping it wouldn't be noticed, which somehow seems like more of a jerk move, and more effort than just leaving them somewhere public where they might be found by someone, even if you don't want to take them to a shelter. Anyway, as much as I begged and pleaded I wasn't allowed to keep one because my dad claimed allergies. No trash kitty for me. God damn, I would have taken that trash kitty so damn quickly. I definitely don't have the best situation for a cat at my place, but how can you say no to that? I guess the prospect of coughing and having runny eyes for the next decade or so might have done it for your dad though, so possibly fair enough. I worked as a garbage man for a very short time last summer, but the best thing I found was an edition of my local newspaper from the day after the Challenger exploded. I've rescued projectors, computers, furniture, and even a very expensive Yamaha keyboard. It just needed a new plug. Loads of music scores, a dining room table with nothing wrong with it. I might just be about to get a 65-inch touchscreen TV that's no longer touchscreen as well. Depends on what happens to it over the next few days. Large companies throw all sorts out and they're far more focused on, I just need to get rid of this, than spending the time to find someone to take it. By the same token, I've also binned about 20 fully working interactive whiteboards because I couldn't get anyone interested in taking them. And yes, I sought permission before taking any of these things. If I just took whatever I saw, I'd have even more stuff. When I was a kid, my dad worked for a company that hauled away dumpsters and at one point found an old alto sax complete in the box. Ended up playing it 4 years up until high school when it was stolen. Couldn't play it after that since my family couldn't afford a rental, let alone pay for a new one. A friend of ours found 2 bullet-resistant vests with paramedic written across them being thrown out behind a fire station. I guess they expire or something? Not a garbage collector, but here's a cool story about how garbage collectors in Ankara, Turkey gathered a bunch of books that were thrown away. They brought them back to the depot where there's a library's worth of books now, and they saved about 20,000 books from the incinerator. One person's trash is indeed another's treasure. It's always trash can, and never trash cannot. Finally, something I can contribute to. I do trash at apartments. In the year I've worked at the job, I've found and kept a couch, 2 desk chairs, a floor lamp, deck furniture, a TV stand, my cat, various decorations I've given to my mum, and some things that I've sold, a bike for $40, some outdoor vases for $30, a bed frame for $50, an original Xbox with at least 80 games all in a box for $20, to my friend that collects old video games, but yeah, it's crazy what people throw away. Once I found a perfectly good stationary bike that my neighbors threw out that I cleaned up and then used for years. I can't believe that this day only comes 52 times a year. Before I was born, my mother found a huge painting of mushrooms. It's blue and yellow, and I'm certain I've seen parts of it glow in the dark, and it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen, and my description gives it no justice. My uncle was, and still is, a garbage man and found a fully boxed Power Rangers Megazord toy. I don't remember which season or what, but it had just been previously opened and all of the parts and such were still inside. I don't remember if they sold it off or what, but it was super cool to see. A part of me feels like maybe a collector tossed their boxes away and mistakenly threw the whole figure with it, or some kid's parents ditched it while cleaning up on a birthday or Christmas. I don't know, but it feels bad. I just wanted to say that the garbage people are severely underrated. In movies, they're shown as people with no aspirations at all, but if no one did that job, the streets would be very dirty, and that's not good, so to all the garbage people who see this, thank you. And for those of you interested, apparently it's a good job with decent benefits. I found a cardboard cutout from the Mr. and Mrs. Smith movie release from when it was in theaters. I put Mr. Smith on one side of the truck and Mrs. Smith on the other. I got a few fun honks going down the road with a gorgeous Angelina Jolie on the back of a trash truck. Ah yes, drive along proudly displaying memorabilia of that solid 5 out of 10 movie that started the whole Brangelina drama of the 2000s. God, I'm old. One time, my brother, who was working as a garbage man at the time, brought me back a brand new Nintendo DS for my birthday. I don't know, he really lucked out into that one. I worked at a garbage plant building new trash silos, and all I got was Weil's disease, leptospirosis, from the rat pee in the garbage. I was ill for weeks. Living near an expensive college, you wouldn't believe the crap that kids chuck when they're in a hurry to move out. A few springs ago, I found a very nice Banana Republic brown leather jacket with spew or soup on the sleeve. I wiped it down with Armor All, vacuumed the crumbs from the pockets, and sold it for $125 that night. My best haul was a nightclub that had a minor fire on their outdoor deck, and they just decided to gut and remodel the whole place. I pulled from the dumpster 3 preamps, 2 300-watt stage speakers, and a guitar amp. I sold everything for more than $500 the next weekend. We have a good friend who garbage picks. He's done so for quite a while now as a hobby. For years, he was the ski fairy. We have 4 kids, and they run through kids' skis, boards, poles, boots, masks, like crazy, as all kids do as they grow. He and his wife and son all skied, and he'd pick up good stuff when he saw it on his rounds. Every so often, we'd pull into the drive, and leaning against the garage would be skis or boots or other equipment that he thought might work for one or more of the kids. The ski fairy made a delivery. He's found lots of nice things and more valuable stuff, but still, my favorite story is his finding money. Change. Not like $6 in a drawer or box, just buckets of metal coins. $780 or so. Not mistakenly thrown out, placed with garbage. And $780 in change is heavy. No mistake of it being tossed. I guess it wasn't worth counting. Garbage men and pickup artists should swap titles, honestly. When people drop off their stuff at the municipal recycling center, they sort out stuff that looks good and sell it for cheap at a sort of thrift shop. That's how I got my Gaggia Paros coffee machine for €8. After thorough cleaning and getting new parts for another €50, it was good to go. If you buy them used, they go for around $200. Something comparable and new costs about $600. Someone dumped a 6x3 patch of drooping agapanthus on the side of the road. I managed to get that into the back of a Rhino ATV to get it home. I sawed that monstrosity into like 18 patches, most lining my yard and some potted. I was so excited, it really helps getting me started into gardening. Now I'm propagating bird of paradise, jade, and some other plants I don't know the name of. I also potted 2 ash tree seedlings for future transplants, but I might try to bonsai one. I once found a Hohner Arbor Series Telecaster electric guitar in the trash. I had someone fix it up and it plays like a gosh darn dream. James Franco's handwritten poetry. Franco was getting his master's in fine arts at my school, where I did work study on the garbage and recycling crew. Lots of great and hilarious finds, but that's the most memorable. 1994 Mills hand grenade that someone had thrown out. Did it work? Only once. I worked on the tractors at our local landfill sometimes. The first time I was out there, I saw an operator pull out a 50-pound bag of dog food and a pack of cupcakes out of the pile. I asked him what he could possibly want with those, and he looked at me like I was an idiot and said, "What? Something for the dog and something for me." Then he leaned up against the tracks and ate one of those cupcakes.
Doctors and nurses of Reddit, have you ever witnessed a couple have a child that was obviously not the father's? If so, what happened? I worked labor and delivery, had a very young mother come in, accompanied by her parents. She was just 12 to 13, and parents looked stuffy and kept telling her she should have had an abortion, she was too young, etc. Her mother was silent the whole time, but leaked tears for her constantly. While she labored, I received a call from a very young boy who said he was her boyfriend. His trembly voice explained that her father wouldn't come to the hospital. I explained that I couldn't give out information, but he could talk to her afterward. I went in, told her he had called, and she showed me a picture of him. He was white, straight red hair, pimply and tiny, the runt of the litter. About an hour later, her physical ed teacher stopped by to check on her, which I thought was odd. We didn't get many teachers checking in on students. He was as opposite of the boyfriend as he could get. Tall, very muscular, beautiful smile, and rich chocolate brown skin. The girl's father accompanied her to the delivery room. Odd, but okay. The more she pushed, the louder she cried. In between, she kept saying, "Sorry, Daddy." Finally, out slid a very beautiful chocolate brown baby boy. I thought her father was going to pass the heck out on my delivery room floor. I did my usual, "It's a boy," and said nothing else. I handed him off to a nursery nurse and got Dad a chair. The new mom said, "I'm sorry, Daddy," over and over again. Her mom, now frowned up, came to see the baby, took one look, started asking God for forgiveness, and left. I sent her dad home a short bit later, admonishing him to react at home, not here. I set up a time for our counselor to meet with him before I left. After talking to new mom, she admitted her gym teacher had been giving her special treatment. I explained sex to her, and she said she'd only kissed the BFF, but had stayed after school to be with her gym teacher. I'm state mandated to report child abuse, so I did. 2 weeks later, with her world shattered, her baby was given up for adoption. I wish her the best. Of note, this was 1989. My husband and I were visiting our friends who just had a baby. We are the godparents, and we were standing in the hallway talking to both sets of grandparents. Well, apparently the hospital has a rule that only 5 visitors may be present in the hallway, but the security guard had let all 6 of us in for some reason, and we didn't realize it. This nasty nurse comes up to us, notes that there are 6 of us, tells us someone will have to leave immediately, and then turns to my husband and says, "Oh, are you the daddy?" Without missing a beat, he says, "That's what we're all trying to figure out here." She gets a look of horror on her face and backs away. Worked in the Army hospital in Fort Lewis. A woman came in for belly pain, and we found out and told her she was 10 weeks pregnant. The husband at the bedside started laughing, grabbed his coat, and left the room explaining to us that he had been in Afghanistan until 3 weeks prior. He looked back at her and just said, "Well, that's that, Brittany." I always liked how classily he left her while she just silently stared off into space. I had a vasectomy. While chatting with the doctor, he told me about another patient. This guy had 3 kids and came in for the snip because he and his wife decided they were done having children. The doctor opened up his sack and found nothing to snip. This guy was born without the ability to have any children. The poor doctor had to explain to him what happened. Imagine finding out that way. 23andMe posts a 25% off coupon 2 hours after this post goes up. Oh! One of my favorite cousins just did 23andMe with her dad and discovered that they were not biologically related at all. This is especially horrible because my aunt, her mother, is one of the most ridiculously zealous and judgmental people I've ever met. She screams at the baby cousins when they don't behave perfectly. She literally threw a pocket Bible at a woman in a grocery store after the woman was on the phone and said a curse word or something. And she likes to send me unsolicited long letters about God's plan for my life. Surprisingly, her husband is the most fun and laid-back person I've ever met. He did not deserve this or her. I learned about heteropaternal superfecundation from a friend of mine. She is a 5'0" blonde white girl introducing me to her 6'5" black twin. Surprises for everyone that day. Not in the hospital, but a friend and his girlfriend were on again, off again, and she got pregnant. She swears it's his. He wants a paternity test. He moves in with her and her mom. She has the baby, take the test. Test is taking a while to come back. Him and his family are over the moon with the baby, kind of forget about it. Mentions it to girlfriend's mom one day and she says, "Oh yeah, didn't she tell you? Came back a while ago. Totally your baby. Awesome, all is well." A few months later, they're moving out and he finds the test in a box, not his baby. I used to work in the newborn nursery at a hospital. We got the babies right from delivery, cleaned them up, footprinted them, checked vitals, etc. Dads usually came in with the newborns. This dad comes in with this baby. Dad is white, mom is white, baby is very obviously not white. The dad was very quiet standing next to this baby, watching us clean it up. He says quietly, "I don't think this is my baby." You could tell he was absolutely devastated. We advised him not to sign the birth certificate until he was sure. Not sure what happened after we sent the baby back out to mom, but I felt awful for the guy. My best friend was dating a girl and knocked her up. They got engaged and planned to get married right after the baby was born. There were about 10 of us in the waiting room waiting for her to crank out the baby. It was essentially her parents, his were in another state, some of her friends, and some of ours. After sitting there for about 2 hours, he walks out with a smirk on his face and says, "Let's go." We all thought something horrible had happened. Her friends asked how the baby is, and he said, "Fine, but black." He motioned for us to go, so we followed him. In the parking garage, he tells us to follow him to his apartment, then sends me a text asking I could put him up for a while. We literally moved him out of his apartment and into my spare bedroom in like an hour tops. Her parents didn't know who to be mad at. The confusion on their faces when he told them the baby was black was priceless. I was blood typing a newborn once. Mom was an O positive, baby was AB positive, which is more or less not possible. I immediately panicked because Jesus God, they mixed up the babies. Someone has the wrong baby. We're gonna get sued. We're gonna have to genetic test the entire nursery. What if they subpoena me for being the idiot who discovered the problem? I don't have insurance. What if they sue me? After repeating the test 3 times, I called the floor and told them that they'd either drawn the wrong baby's blood or they'd switched the babies because mom couldn't be the baby's mother. No, it was a donor egg. The redraw matched fine. Everyone was where they were supposed to be. Oh God, my heart though. I work in anesthesia. One of my colleagues had someone vaginally deliver a baby with Steve's lunchbox tattooed above the birth canal. The OBGYN said to the father after the delivery, "Congratulations, Steve." The guy replied that his name was indeed not Steve. Don't know if that counts. My wife is an RN/hospital supervisor. Code yellow is the code over the intercom for security or large male nurses needed. It rarely ever happens, but every now and then over the speakers you hear a "code yellow, labor and delivery." You know the reason. I used to work with a guy whose wife was pregnant. Near time for delivery, everyone at her place of business had a big party with gifts, money, etc. So, big day comes, water breaks, they get in car to go to hospital. She breaks the news on the way there that it's not his, the kid is into the race, and if he could just drop her off at the hospital and then leave, that would be great. He took a few days off work, found a new apartment, moved out, filed divorce, etc. He called into work and told someone what happened. News spread pretty fast. All congratulations cards, etc. were cleaned up and thrown away. Everyone was very sensitive to his pain. Except, somehow, I don't know how, I did not get the news. So on his first day back, I walked into the office he shared with 6 other guys and said, Hey, Daddy-O, how's fatherhood so far? Getting any sleep? Got some pictures? Let's see the little tyke." He slowly lifted his head to look at me with a painful look. The room was dead silent. One of his workmates stood up, grabbed my arm, and walked me out of the room, shushing me. "What happened?" I asked. "Did it die? What's the problem?" When he told me, I about died myself. I still feel bad for the dude, and it's been 30 years. "Sorry, can we just talk about the fact that she said, by the way, this kid is not yours, and if you could just drop me off at the hospital and then leave, that'd be great. Like, you can't just drop that on someone like that." I worked with this guy a few years back. Him and his wife were pregnant. They were super excited and shared the news with everyone and put stuff all over social media. So fast forward a few months, and the kid is unfortunately stillborn. They had a professional photographer come to the hospital and they did a series of photos, holding the baby, dressing it up, kissing it on the head, you know, usual newborn photos. The bizarre thing is they put them all on Facebook. I found it kind of morbid, but whatever. I've never lost a kid, so that's cool. One day at work, a guy from a different branch comes into the store and congratulates my coworker, slaps him on the back and says all this stereotypical new dad small talk BS. My coworker informs him the baby was born dead. The other guy refuses to believe it and keeps saying, "F you, man, quit messing with me. I saw the pictures on Facebook." They go back and forth and the guy finally realizes he's not being messed with. This was the most uncomfortable exchange I've ever seen between 2 humans. I'm not a nurse. My professor was a labor and delivery nurse, and she once saw a man running between 2 delivery rooms. Both women he had impregnated went into labor and gave birth the same day. Supposedly, the one he was married to was angry because the woman he cheated with was impregnated after the wife but had her kid 10 minutes before the wife. Labor and delivery is apparently the most drama-filled section of hospitals. My significant other is planning to be a nurse, and he's going to work in labor and delivery neonatal this year, and I'm excited to hear any dramatic stories. My grandmother was a nurse. Once she was assisting with delivering a baby, and the ostensible father commented that the child looked good for a premature baby. Without thinking, my grandmother told the truth. That baby is not premature. So I guess I know where I get my social obliviousness from. A coworker's aunt just found out her dad wasn't actually her dad. So she was really big into genealogy and had mapped out her family tree as far as she could go. She took one of those Ancestry DNA tests about 2 months ago, and her father's side didn't line up with what she was expecting. In fact, she didn't recognize a single name that she was matched with paternally. She casually asked her dad if he knew any of the names, and he recognized the surname of the maintenance man at the apartment complex where he and his wife, Aunt's mom, lived shortly after they had gotten married, claimed he was a lousy repairman who always flirted with his wife, etc. Aunt's mom had passed away a few years ago, so she decided to not tell her dad the news. Had a lesbian couple come in. One of them was pregnant, neither knew. Judging from all the screaming, this information was poorly received. My brother was doing his OBGYN rotation. His story is that in the first birth he assisted, the woman had her husband leave the room. Seems odd these days, but he had the husband step out for the comfort of the patient. The baby is delivered and the color was not even close. Lily white parents and very black baby. She wants him to stay to talk to her husband who is about to come back, and he bails on the whole situation. She was playing the odds all the way to the end. Had a college buddy whose fiancée was pregnant. They were the perfect couple. Both had just over a year with great careers starting out. Everything was butterflies and rainbows. Fast forward to the delivery room. They're in there and out comes a very black baby. He's quite the pale redhead, and she's a blonde, blue-eyed Texas girl. He made sure everyone was okay, waited for her parents to arrive, and left without saying a word. He moved all of his stuff out of the house while she was in the hospital and cut off all communications with her, just walked out of their lives in the most stone-cold act I'd ever seen. They were together for 9 years, and he just left cold turkey. She tried to contact him at his job a few times, but he quickly moved up the ladder and eventually got a job in another city. He told me once that he took solace in the fact that her family had already dropped about $10,000 in a wedding that never happened. My son came out and looked really tan. My ex-girlfriend and I are pretty white. I thought for a second she cheated on me. We are now separated for different reasons unrelated to her child, and he is pasty white as hell. Got one heck of a suntan in the uterus, though. Not a doctor, but a distant cousin of mine definitely has children that don't belong to the father. My cousin was adopted as an infant and was essentially a crack baby. She struggled with some developmental issues and has a low IQ compared to most, but she can still live on her own with little to no issues. She, a white woman, married a Latino guy, really dark brown skin, several years ago, and they had a son together who has dark hair, dark skin, and dark eyes. He is easily identified as their son. The real trouble happens years later. Her husband, who we'll call Javier, has some IQ issues of his own. Just a little slow when it comes to tasks and reasoning. Anyway, Javier is in the military and gets deployed internationally for about 6 months. When he comes home, his wife is 4 months pregnant. You do the math. He still believes the baby is his own, even after it's born with pale skin and blonde hair and blue eyes. If that wasn't bad enough, it happens again 2 years later with another baby. Same blonde hair and blue eyes. Everyone knows she slept with a different man. It was actually her high school boyfriend, but Javier still thinks the children are his. It's kind of sad, but at this point, there's not much you can do. He has raised the kids as his own. I'm a nurse, but this didn't happen to me. A friend of mine got pregnant in high school. She claimed it was our local doctor's son's kid, so he agreed to deliver his grandchild for free. Child delivered, and it was obviously half African American. Doctor's son and girl were both white. I think he still delivered it for free as he was relieved his 14-year-old son wasn't a dad. I'm too young to have witnessed it, but back in the late 50s or 1960, my uncle had an affair with a woman who later divorced her husband and became his wife. She had 2 children with her first husband, or at least that was the official story that everyone maintained. However, it was extremely obvious, based on appearance, that the second of my aunt's 2 children while married to her first husband was my uncle's biological child. She looked nothing like my aunt's first husband or her older half-brother, and exactly like my uncle. As the years went by, the pretense was dropped and was never mentioned again. Both my sons came out with barrel chests, red hair, and huge hands and feet, so they look exactly like me. My wife looks at them all loopy on drugs and says, "That's not my kid!" The whole room went silent for a minute, and then we bust out laughing. My wife has a wicked sense of humor. My sister got pregnant in high school and later met her now husband when she was 5 months pregnant. She is white and boyfriend is black. The baby daddy was white and not present. I was with our entire family, including my now brother-in-law, visiting the baby. My sister was still in recovery from her C-section. Brother-in-law picks up my niece. The nurse looks at him and says she should darken up in a few days. We all had a laugh. We knew he wasn't the father, but she didn't. I always wondered if she felt bad or assumed adultery. They have 2 more girls together, and he was able to adopt 3 years later. Kinda happened to my mom. My biological father is Greek with very pale skin, and my mom is a white Western European mutt. When I was born, I had very dark skin and a head full of thick black hair. He didn't seem concerned, but his mother freaked out, called my mother and grandmother not so nice names, and left. My father ended up splitting on us when I was about 3 weeks old with no explanation. A couple months later, my skin lightened, all of my black hair fell. Turns out he was the father. We've never tried to reach back out to his family because in that first year of my life, they went through a lot of drama, including arrests, rehab stays, drive-by shootings, an affair followed by a divorce, another baby mama my mother didn't know about, the list goes on. My father and I tried to form a relationship when I was in high school. It went okay at first, and then it got weird very quickly. He insisted I called him Dad, insisted on regular visitation, routinely showed up at my friends' and boyfriends' houses causing a scene, insisted I get family pictures with his new lady and his 5 other kids. None of us had the same mother, and this is not including the baby he had and ditched before we got together with my mom. I regret ever trying at all. He and his family were and still are trashy hot messes, and I'm glad my family decided to keep me away from them. Cherry on top, he was working for my now husband's parents when my husband and I first met. Once his parents found out who he was and what had happened, they fired him so I would never have to run into him at their business. He had it coming anyway, so they were glad to finally stop making excuses for him and let him go. I was doing epidurals in residency. This Caucasian couple was a more rural part of the country, and they don't look or sound particularly educated. Anyhow, wife is particularly antsy, asking when she can go home even though the baby isn't out yet. Husband looks bored and uninterested, like he's been there a whole bunch of times. I usually don't stay in the rooms during delivery, but this one I just happened to be nearby to give more in the epidural because of a tear immediately after delivery. Anyhow, when I got to the room, the wife is holding her eyes shut and doesn't want to see the baby. I look at the baby and he's obviously black. Now the husband is paying attention and he sees what I do. He keeps repeating, "When that baby gonna pink up?" louder and louder. The OB tries to diffuse things by reminding everyone that this moment is critical and suggests the baby should be taken to the resuscitation area in the NICU and that the father should step out while the OB repaired the laceration. We called the social worker and security and I was called elsewhere, so I don't know what happened afterwards, so I can't imagine it was good. I worked as a lab tech before I became a nurse. We had a set of twins in the NICU that were super early and the mom was still in the OR getting sewed up from the cesarean. I was drawing baby B's blood when mom was wheeled over to baby A's isolette. She was crying and said, "Oh, thank God you're not black. I have been so worried the last 7 months." So newborn babies, especially when they're born early, are very pink, almost red. So even if the baby was part black, their skin isn't necessarily dark yet. But looking at these babies, it was obvious they were going to be black. The shape of the face, the texture of the hair, and baby B that I was working on had an intense Mongolian spot. A few weeks later, my NICU nurse friend told me that the babies were now on a no info status, meaning security alert, can't give anyone information about them, can't refer them by name, etc. She said there was a huge fight because the mom's husband, white guy, obviously noticed that the babies were half black and that the mom cheated on him and got pregnant. The real dad, black guy, came in and didn't realize the mom was even married. These poor babies. I had a test done on my son when he was about 7 months old. Baby mama constantly told me he wasn't mine, but then came after me for child support. Got the test done and he was mine. So I hired a lawyer and we sat and chilled. 4 months later, she's arrested on charges of distribution of meth where my son lived, and he's been with me for the last 8 years. Now she pays me child support. Edit. I was remembering events wrong here. I got my kid when he was 11 months old after the Department of Homeland Security did a random stop drug test on her and she failed for meth. I then started a 2-year battle in juvenile court to not allow the state to reunify with the mother. I finally got juvenile court to release my case to district court, where we fought for actual custody. During our district court battle, she took my son for a visit, and I got a call from the cops in a city an hour away that she had been arrested on a domestic with her boyfriend at a hotel, and they searched her and found needles and meth paraphernalia. That was the last time she had him unsupervised. We went about 2 years of her barely calling, seeing him once a month for 10 to 20 minutes, until she finally got arrested on attempt to distribute meth charges. She got out on bail and was arrested for it again 3 weeks later. She spent 3 years in state prison and has been out about 8 months now. She appears to be clean and just gave me $100 for extra child support yesterday. She's only court appointed to pay $52 a month. So we're giving her a shot, but she is still and will remain on supervised visits for a long time. The whole fiasco has been such a blur, it's hard to remember exactly when, what, where happened, especially after 4 to 5 years of really not having to deal with her. At the time, it was utter crap though. She punched me a couple times, lied under oath, sent me threats, inappropriate photos of her with other men, the list goes on and on. I've really tried to put a lot of it behind me and forget about as much of it as I can to try and help me forgive her so she can at least be somewhat a part of my kid's life, because that's what he wants. I just watch her like a hawk now. I had the opposite happen, sort of. My wife and I are both brown-skinned, dark-haired, half Mexicans, and our moms are both 100% white blondes with blue and green eyes. So we sort of knew it was a crapshoot with our baby, but the nurse who was assisting with delivery had no idea. At one point, she gets sort of nervous and calls for help, and another, I guess, more senior nurse came in and nodded and came over to talk to me. I thought there was something wrong with the baby as she comes over and stumbles through some questions. So I was father and no one else was coming, etc. Then finally, she awkwardly asks if either of us happened to be blonde growing up. I said, yeah, I was. And both the baby's grandparents are blonde as they come, and this wave of relief went over her as she brought me over to see this blonde-as-heck crowning baby head. It's funny because he looks just like me if you applied a Gringo Instagram filter. We often get awkward questions about his heritage, and my wife always hits them with, yeah, we're not sure if he's mine. It's always funny to see people nod for a moment and then go, wait, what? Not a medical professional, but I know of a related court case that made it to the state's highest court. Black guy and white woman are married. She is a former prostitute, and at some point they separate. He moves out of state, she moves out of state, and she goes back to prostituting. Guy gets a phone call around 9 months later from a friend or relative of his ex, saying that his ex is pregnant and ready to give birth any day now. Guy drives across the country so he could be there for the delivery. Baby comes out and is white, has blue eyes, and red hair. Mom says it must be a Trix baby. Seeing as the guy is black, he understandably pieces out. Later on, the mom's parental rights are terminated. As you can imagine from the prostituting, she was not a fit mother, and the state went about trying to find the dad to be notified before the kid could be adopted. Since the dude was still her husband at the time the child was born, legally he was the presumptive father. The state does genetic testing, and twist, turns out he is the father. For an extra kick in the pants, the state ends up terminating his parental rights for abandonment. Not a happy ending.
What's your best, fire me, I freaking dare you moment from work? Worked for a newspaper, editing and actually putting the paper together, arranging it all, placing stories and pictures where they need to be, titling, quoting, and sourcing everything. I was a one-man team and used an overly complicated system that I figured out how to use really effectively. They treated me like garbage, set impossible deadlines, and berated me for not meeting them. One day, the boss tells me to fully complete a paper by the end of the day. Gave me no warning, I had no articles from the journalists, and no photos from photographers. It was my job to collect it all from everyone, and he wants me to do it in a single day? I told him no. If he wants it done, he has to give me more time. He tells me if I don't have it done by the end of the day, I'm fired. I tell him that this paper can't function without me. He tells me I need to take the day off and cool my temper, and that he'll do my job for me. I get a call an hour after I get home, and that he needs me to come in and do it, and I can have as much time as I need. Promptly quit on that rumphole. Forget your stinky newspaper. Worked a job where I was the only one who knew how to take apart, clean, fix, and put all the equipment back together and do the weekly and monthly maintenance. I had a boss tell me one day that I was doing a poor job and not doing enough and that anyone could do it. If I didn't step up, I would be fired, or else they had manuals for each piece of equipment. So that night, I took apart all the equipment, weekly and monthly stuff too, cleaned them, and then just left it apart for them to figure out that morning. Then I turned my phone off after getting home for the entire day, as I had the day off. When I turned it back on the next day, I saw that I had initially received angry texts ordering me to return and put everything back together. This lasted an hour. Then text saying I risked being fired, then text begging me to return, then more text trying to compromise with OT, then an apology, before nothing else for the rest of the day. Other than that, the head boss wanted to see me as soon as I came in the next day. Came in the next day, and over half the stuff was still not put together, and what had been put together was put together haphazardly, and would need to be taken out again, then put back in correctly. Was immediately asked to be seen by my boss and their boss to explain myself the moment I was seen entering. Once in the office, I told them that if they weren't there to apologize, then just fire me, or drop it and let me put the stuff back together. They looked at each other and then told me that I could get back to work. Boss never called me lazy again. That's so crazy to me. So legitimately, this guy, your boss, was like, I can't believe it. You're just so lazy because no one else here knows how to put these machines back together. Why are you so lazy? As the kids say it, that's cap. When I was 17, I worked a summer holiday job at Pizza Hut. I had transferred my hometown restaurant from my university town restaurant. I was there for 5 weeks and hadn't been paid yet. The jerkhead boss claimed it was because I gave him the wrong employee number. I hadn't. Anyway, after 5 weeks of no pay, I rang him on New Year's Eve, i.e. busiest night of the summer, and said I wasn't coming to work because I wasn't a volunteer and I wasn't going to work for free. He told me if I didn't go to work, I may as well not come back as I would be fired. I didn't go to work and I had a fun New Year's instead. Then a few days later, I called the employment tribunal. I'm in New Zealand, and told them what had happened. They called my jerkhead boss. He then called me, offered me my job back, and was nice as a pie for the rest of the summer. I worked at an unspecified telecom a few years ago. I was a senior manager in charge of programming, third-level support, and production support. A business unit bullied through code changes made by the business side through a side deal with a legacy programmer in the data center, circumventing my team, QA and production testing. That just had to get implemented immediately without going through any testing at all. I refused. The CIO overruled me. 72 hours later, phone activations had ground to a halt. Customers nationwide were screaming. And the CIO called phone conference after phone conference, demanding timelines for when I was going to get this crap fixed. He kept screaming to have members of my team to get on the phone and explain themselves to him. I refused. Finally, I snapped and told him that if he wanted me to fix his mistake, I would need to get off the freaking phone, go work with my teams, and the only reason they hadn't walked out yet was that I was keeping him off their bums. But we would all happily go together. 24 hours later, QA and my team had the cow crap cleaned up and fixed for a clean rollout. This was all to avoid a 24-hour delay for QA production testing. I wish I could say that was the only worst time. Husband was having his gallbladder taken out and was having complications before surgery. I needed to leave from work for about 2 hours, and my boss threw a fit, stating I couldn't leave. I told her I had 300 hours of sick time I can use for myself and my husband, and if she wanted to push, I'd take all of it at once, leaving no one but her to do my job. She said she'd fire me if I tried. I just looked at her and said, I have to go. I'll send you my doctor's note. I wasn't fired. I was actually awarded that year for job performance. I didn't take all 300 hours. I just threatened to since I was protected by FMLA. I only took the day off. I don't know if anyone else got that vibe when she said, I have to go, I'll send you my doctor's note. It was such a CSI moment, just, I have to go, I'll send you my doctor's note. Anyway, you tell them. You tell that boss. Yeah. Over the first year I worked there, I essentially took over most of the tasks in my department, which were previously held by other departments and was done badly because of it. This led to a massive increase in productivity. I then found out I was paid significantly less than what others were making and others in my position across the industry were making. So I go to my boss and tell them I had done all this work, increasing productivity, and I would like to discuss a raise. They said no. Okay. So I worked there for another year, asking for a raise every now and again until I was offered a job that paid double. It didn't start for a couple months, so I held on to that job until I was set to submit my 2 weeks. I asked for a raise again, thinking, what the hell, why not? My boss goes off, tells me I won't get a raise, and says some very colorful things about it. It culminated with her telling me, if you don't like your pay, maybe we should evaluate your future at this company. To which I replied, already have. I took another job and this was your last chance to offer me what I deserve. I quit and walked out of that office. Friends told me that my sudden departure caused a massive backup of work that ended with my manager being fired for it. Ah, c'est la vie. Do I love stories like that? That lady. What a jerk. Worked for Radio Shack and always butted heads with the district manager. He wanted me to use these ridiculous sales techniques that might work in a big city, but were really pushy. The year he became our DM, I won a contest for best salesman in the whole company out of about 14,000 employees, and I did it without being pushy and forcing stuff on people. He still tried to get me to use these ridiculous techniques each month when he would visit, but after I won the contest, I stopped sugarcoating it and would flat out tell him, "That's stupid. I'm not going to do it that way." I was a summer teacher at one of those Korean SAT prep schools that hired U.S. college students for a summer, and then promptly worked them to death. Although I will admit, the pay was pretty good. We taught 8:30 a.m. through 5:30 p.m. with an hour lunch, but had homework to grade every evening, prep work, etc. Well, they were mainly focused on teaching English, but I was a math and physics major, so they had me teaching SAT math and college prep physics. No problem. Then they decided since I studied physics, I should also teach their chemistry class. I tried to tell them that I didn't know much chemistry, but they insisted. So I worked my backside off refreshing myself on all the stuff before I taught it, while still teaching another math and physics class. One day in the middle of this, I got legitimately sick. I called in the night before, per the rules, and told them I couldn't come in. I took one day off, sleeping in my apartment, and then dragged myself in the next day. When I show up, they pull me aside and say, "So how do you plan on making up the time for the classes you've missed?" Excuse me? "Well, we didn't have anyone to teach your classes, so all the kids are behind now. You have to make up the time. We figured you could just extend your morning class an hour for the first week, aka teach over lunch, and your afternoon class could then start an hour early for the next week. Why didn't you have a sub teach my class?" Then they messed up and said, "We don't have a sub." Well then no, I'm not going to skip my lunch because of your guys' poor planning. "We'll fire you, and then you won't get your plane ticket reimbursed," they replied. Go ahead. First, I followed the rules and gave you notice I was going to be out. Second, you just told me you don't have a sub for my classes. That means if I leave, you're going to lose all those students that I'm teaching. That will cost you a lot more than the plane ticket will cost me. This was about 5 to 6 years ago. I was the second in charge of our shipping department, making $11 an hour. The head of shipping had a mental breakdown, so I took over while he got help. About 3 weeks after he returned, the company released him because they didn't like him and I could do the job. When they told me they had released him, I asked if there was going to be interviews for the job, or was the job just mine since I was number 2. I was told they were looking, but I would have a chance to interview once that process started. Fast forward about 6 months, and I'm still doing this job that pays around $50,000 a year for $11 an hour. We had some issues with staff turnover and process changes because the warehouse manager thought he knew best and would listen. They then tell me that there wouldn't be a shipping manager, just a shipping lead, which would be an hourly position. I ask about a raise and get told my review is in 2 months, so just wait. I wait. 3 months. 4 months. Then one day, after a 14-hour night shift, I get a call from the WM telling me I have to come in right now. When I get there, he unloads on me for things that were beyond my control and mistakes other people made. We start yelling, and that's when I told him, "I make $11 an hour doing this job ex-boss told me he got paid $50K a year to do. I don't need this crap. Give me a raise or I won't be back." I then went home and back to sleep. When I go back to work, I'm met by WM and Ops Manager. They appreciate the hard work I've been doing and are putting me on a salary starting at $45K since ex-boss was there longer. I negotiated up to $48K. I was working in a restaurant. Already knew I was sick, but our managers were rumpholes, and I knew if I called in, they'd be extremely upset. Showed up to work around 8, and by 9 a.m. I knew I wasn't going to last for the rest of the day. Manager still made me stay. Around 9:30, I was pre-bussing my tables, and just the sight of half-eaten food pushed me over the edge. I managed not to get sick and hold it until I got to the dishwashing area, but then upchucked in a trash can immediately after putting my plates down. A coworker saw me and vouched for me when I went to tell my manager I was leaving for the doctor. He said, "Even with the doctor's note, if you leave work today, you'll be fired." I said, "You have human waste in a kitchen trash can and haven't even done anything about it. It's on camera. I'm leaving." Showed up for work a few days later and didn't hear anything about it. Ended up quitting a few weeks later for a job at a couple considerably higher scale restaurants. I worked in a deli several years ago while I was a university student, and one time I caught bronchitis and a wicked eye infection at the same time. I tried calling a few people to see if we could trade shifts for the week. Nobody answered their phone, to no one's surprise. So I called my boss instead and told her what was going on. She replied back saying my health is not her concern and that if I'm not showing up, I need to find someone to cover. Just so I understand, I have an infection on top of having bronchitis. I am on antibiotics and can barely function properly, and you expect me to come in and operate slicing machinery because nobody wants to take my shift. Trying to articulate this without coughing was difficult, but I managed it. Correct. My body decided that now was the perfect time to have a coughing fit, which my boss heard through the phone, and that prompted her to say, you know what? Maybe you should stay home this week. I hated that place. It's not like we were ever understaffed. If anything, we were always overstaffed. But freak me if I tried trading shifts with someone else for health reasons. I've had to cancel appointments because of this crap. I got out a few months after the bronchitis incident. I was elbows deep in an AT&T Unix machine that should have been replaced a decade before. Parts strewn all over a desk when the client came in to see what was taking me so long. You've got 3 dead fans, one of the power supplies has failed, there's a bad CMOS battery, and the video card is glitchy and refusing to allow the machine to post sometimes. So how long is that going to take? 15 minutes? I could patch things up in a couple of hours, but I'm going to have to come back in a few days with new parts. If you can't fix it in the next half hour, you're fired. I'll find someone that knows what they're doing. I stood up, grabbed my tools, and started walking. Where are you going? I told you how long it would take. That's longer than a half hour, so I guess I'm fired. My firing lasted about 3 more steps towards the door. 2004. Worked at a municipality department. One day the programmers update the work PCs and block pretty much everything and anything. No internet at all. No authorization for installing anything. All games removed from Windows. They even removed the calculator function for some reason. Then the supervisors started moving coworkers around and my entire team was dispersed across a gigantic building for no reason. We were the top team in terms of results. The supervisors simply hated our guts for some reason. So me and one of my coworkers tried to devise some way to have communication without having to travel for 5 minutes each time, across the building and down a floor, just to get to each other's desk and ask a simple yes or no question. We do this during our lunch break. Our supervisor interrupts and asks what we're doing. We explain we're trying to save time and maximize communication and results. The supervisor, who doesn't like us anyway, says we should get back to work and quit trying to communicate through unauthorized means. Okay, we simply stopped trying to install Messenger on our phones. One day later, the supervisor is looking for my coworker. I don't know where he is. I say so. Well, then contact him through your Messenger program. The one you told us to quit installing? Yes. We gave up on that. On your orders. She tried to get me fired for refusing to obey basic orders. I explained the situation to her superior. He let me get back to work and told me to ignore her from then on. I moved to a better post a few months later because she made my life unbearable from that day on. And I finally went and told the upper floor they'll either move me elsewhere or I quit. As I was studying in Paris, I also worked night shifts in a hotel near the Hôtel de Ville district. I worked from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. several nights in a row. The hotel was very busy as it was a very touristic area, so getting 4 hours of sleep over the total 4 to 5 nights was usual. It happened several times a week that the hotel manager simply forgot to relieve me in the morning, so I'd be falling asleep on the counter as they came 2 or 3 hours late. When I politely remarked that I'm tired and they're late again, he'd simply laugh it off and say, "I guess we forgot about you." Finally, I decided to pass a job interview for some other work that essentially happened during the day, so I'd finally sleep my nights. When I found out that they accepted me in that new job, I waited until my shift should have started that Friday evening and phoned that manager waiting for me to relieve him at the desk. "Oh, hello, I just called to say that I got a new job from next Monday, so I'm not coming tonight, nor ever." "What do you... But you cannot! Why didn't you say something sooner?" "I guess I forgot about you." I used to work at a small family-owned grocery store for a few years. We got our load in on Mondays and Thursdays, and we got passed over one Monday, and the distributor said we'd get the missing load in on Thursday. So what essentially happened was a double load, and my 2 receiving partners were out sick. I was the only person in the warehouse receiving at the time and got to take on 15 plus pallets of groceries that needed to hit the shelves immediately. I was specifically told to not go up front and to do what I could while the front end crew covered the aisles and cash registers. Well, a lot of them were either lazy, untrained, or just putting in their hours so they could pay bills. I put in my earbud, just one, and get to work. I'm halfway through checking the pallets when I get called up front, so I ignore it and continue. Then I get called in again, so I head up there and get yelled at by a new hire with a bad attitude to do your job and bag for me. The customer was a regular, and we got along very well, and she told me that she was fine and could bag her own groceries. Between the customer and the fact that I wasn't having it, I walked away. I had 3 years and 2 ranks on her, so I didn't give half a crap and went back to my pallets. Then I get the newest hotshot manager who replaced the old hotshot manager who replaced the beloved manager who trained basically the whole store, in my face about having an earbud in on the clock, which is allowed as long as you have one ear free, and said I could be sent home and not come back if I wanted to listen to music. So I gestured to the pallets and said, "Go for it. These all need to be checked in and broken down. Have fun." I got to keep my earbud in, so I had that going for me, which was nice.
Teachers of Reddit, have you ever had a crush on a student? And if so, how did you feel about yourself? I used to teach entry-level programming at an art school to undergrads, and later at the graduate level. It happened all the freaking time, but I never felt bad about it, because they were adults and I was the same age. Obviously, I couldn't act on anything as a matter of policy, and I certainly didn't let it affect my grading, but god dang it was difficult, especially with the 2 instances where I could tell it was mutual. Or maybe it wasn't and they just wanted better grades, I don't know. They both got C's regardless. Edit. I get it. D jokes. My dad was my mom's professor in university. They got married. The marriage didn't go well. I am the result of what happens when people try to save a relationship by having a baby. College professor here. I get a lot of gorgeous students, but the attraction usually lasts as long as it takes them to open their mouths. What can I say? When you're in your 30s, 18 to 22-year-olds suddenly seem very shallow and immature to you. Trust me, you will come to think the same way. But then, I had a student who was not only stunningly beautiful, but also very mature beyond her years, and she had a lot of similar interests to me. And what's better, because she was new to America from England, she was also a bit lost and confused, and I told her she could come to me whenever she wanted if she needed advice and guidance. She did for a while, but I never did anything but just talk with her. As attracted as I was to her, trying to make a move would have been a very tricky thing because student-teacher relationships are very taboo. The thing is, though, as she adjusted to America, she started coming by less often because she didn't really need our talks anymore. After the class was over, I hardly ever ran into her anymore, so the opportunity just never presented itself. I look back on it now as a for the best thing. Even if she had been interested in me, and I don't think she was, I'm quite used to my students, even the more mature ones, automatically seeing me as an old geezer, even though I'm 31 now and this was a couple years ago. If I'd had a relationship with her and we'd been caught, it could have potentially been the end of my career, or at the very least it would have gotten me in a lot of hot water. But I also found that shortly after the class ended and I stopped seeing her with any frequency, that she fell out of my thoughts too, and I went back to being interested in women my own age who are preferably not my students. I'm actually glad that it doesn't bother me anymore because I feel like it would be beyond pathetic for someone like me to be so hopelessly in love with a student. I'm 22 and have a senior, so I'd assume 17 or 18, piano student who I most certainly don't have romantic or sexual feelings for. Honestly, the student-teacher barrier comes pretty naturally to me. But I remember after her first lesson being very intrigued/stricken by the fact that she reminds me so much of myself as a high school senior. Same sort of aspirations and motivation, or rather lack thereof for anything that isn't music, that I had at her age. Same sort of unusual taste in music, same dry and sarcastic sense of humor. She's even got a lot of the same weaknesses that I did before going to conservatory, most notably scales, sight reading, and jazz voicings. I don't like her, but I'm fairly certain that high school me would have been all over her. Not me personally, but had a guy that graduated my year 2012, secretly dating our student teacher for AP English in 12th grade. Not a huge thing, she was 4 years older. They started dating 2 weeks into the school year that year, and he got her pregnant. They got married last June. It was a very weird situation for all of us that knew, as she was very open with the girls in the class when our main teacher was out for a few days. Once had a very, very attractive student teacher in my senior year. She was 24, I was 18. A ton of the other students were talking about how bad they wanted to screw her. I became pretty good friends with her. We read similar books, listened to similar music, and one day she asked me for a ride home because her car wasn't working. I drove her to her house and she invited me inside. After talking for about an hour, we went into the bedroom and screwed. We kept it secret from everybody, and after I graduated, we began a stable relationship. We dated for about 2 years until she moved to Washington. I would say she had a crush on me. I teach kindergarten, voice actors note, bear with me here, so I don't exactly get crushes on my students. But as a person that doesn't want any kids themselves, there are a few kids, maybe 1 in 40, where I can't help myself from thinking I'd adopt the crap out of you if you didn't have any parents. It takes a special kid to bring out my paternal instinct. I would bang the majority of the moms though. I think a lot of people underestimate the amount of influence you have as a young, in your 20s, and successful teacher over high school age kids. I don't know how to say this, but you kind of get a free in as the young teacher because they can't relate to the more veteran teachers. The kids see a somewhat idealized version of you, and if you wanted to, it is quite easy to take advantage of that trust. This is why teacher-student relationships are avoided by teachers, because it's hard to tell what's real and what is a byproduct of that special mentor relationship. If you think your student is the one or something, just keep in touch and hit them up when they're an adult, mentally, not when they hit 18 and graduate. I was a teacher's assistant for a drawing class for a couple of semesters. It was the sort of TA position where the professor would hand you the outline for the semester and you'd teach one of his classes. There was this one girl that looked like a sort of Persian goddess, and she was freaking talented, which drew me to her even more. We got to the part of the class where we started doing portraits. I'd take volunteers from the class and we'd all draw them. I would bounce between critiquing students' work and doing the portrait myself because observing is a great way to learn. The first few went very well. I was on my teaching game and my portraits were up to my standards. Being a good sport, I'd give it to the model when they were done. The first one asked for theirs, and it just sort of became a thing. Then she came up. The thing about drawing is, you have to be able to ignore your brain's preconceived ideas of what you're looking at and dissect the visual information analytically. I found her so beautiful for the first time in my life, I could not do this. I drew, I erased, I drew, I erased. I wasn't bouncing around as much as I had been because I was so frustrated that I could not draw the one person in the class I wanted to draw. We finished, and it turned out okay. Not great, just okay. I still gave it to her, but I was honestly ashamed of it. At the end of the last portrait class, one of the models asked how they'd done. This led to a discussion on how they'd all done. Persian Goddess asked me the inevitable question. I told her she was difficult to draw. She asked why. I immediately regretted my initial response. I think I said something about her features being unusual or something cringeworthy. I wanted to tell her she was too beautiful, but I couldn't. If you're reading this, Persian Goddess, I'm sorry. I should have told you that you were gorgeous. This may not exactly count, but some years ago I taught English in Japan. I'm a woman, and I taught an older female student at her house. Sorry, Reddit, no going where you think. She was quite nice, and one day she asked me to teach a lesson for her son, who was in high school. I agreed. I just came at the usual time and did the lesson with him instead of her. Well, he was a senior in high school. I was in my late 20s, and I thought he was adorable. I don't really feel guilty. My thoughts didn't even begin to approach the sexual side of a crush. I just thought he was cute and sweet, but he definitely had a bit of a crush on me, and our mutual appreciation was probably noticed by the mom. So here is where it gets hilarious. Next week, I come to teach the mom again, and we do the usual introductory conversation at the beginning of the lesson. It was during the rainy season, so I said to her that I miss the sun. She looked very confused for a minute, so I pointed up towards the sky to try and mime what I was talking about. We were in the first floor of her house, and I'm pretty sure I was pointing upstairs to her son's room, so she continued to misinterpret my English. It took me a minute to realize why she had this upset look on her face, and I don't think I was able to save her from her thoughts. After that day, she canceled the class, and I never saw either of them again. As this is not a throwaway, let me restate that I never crossed any lines with their son, even in the privacy of my mind, so I don't really feel bad about the whole thing, but I thought my story might amuse Reddit. Imagine having your relationship be over the intricacies of the English language. And I can only feel bad for the older female student because she couldn't exactly ask her if she meant the giant flaming ball in the sky or her progeny just chilling on the floor right above them. I taught a large lecture class at university level for a number of years. My department head clearly stated that hanky-panky with students was a fireable offense. There were opportunities, but I did not pursue. One situation, though not directly pertinent, stands out. When lecturing, I paid close attention to student reactions. In larger classes, I tended to settle on certain students for my repeated sampling. If they seemed to understand what I was talking about, things were okay. During one lecture on some fairly complex ideas, I had included, among other students, one beautiful co-ed. Until that day, I knew she was beautiful and appreciated her for that, but nothing more. Each time I spot checked, she was paying rapt attention, eyes wide, full of excitement at the knowledge I was dispensing. I was falling in love during my lecture. Such beauty, and she was enthralled with the topic that I totally loved. I required students to do a journal at the end of each class. She obviously had no clue as to what I was talking about. I was deeply puzzled. She had been right there at every point. Later in the semester, I went to a men's basketball game. She was a cheerleader, and one of the prime ones at that. Even while our team was being embarrassed by the visitors, the cheerleaders kept doing their job as if the fans' excitement would make a difference in this lost cause. And she was one of their leaders, eyes wide, showing the same excitement and verve that I had interpreted as her interest in my lecture. I learned a life lesson that day. As someone who has trouble understanding social cues and facial expressions sometimes, I can definitely relate to this. It's hard to know if somebody's face is just being naturally expressive or if they're showing a genuine interest in you. Back in 8th grade, I had this young, super attractive teacher for history. Don't know how old she was, but she had only been teaching for 1 year and was recently married, so my guess was 23 to 24. Anyway, one day I go to her desk to ask her something, and she was standing and leans forward to show me in the book what I need to read/look at. Well, I missed everything she was saying because holy heck, I could see right down her shirt and those knockers had 8th grade me captured. I was totally zoned out just looking and looking. At some point she stopped talking and noticed what I was doing and just smiled and was looking at me, never stood up or covered up. Our eyes met and she just smiled, winked, and then sent me on my way. The rest of the year was kind of flirty, but she never tried anything. Fast forward 12 to 13 years, and one day randomly on Facebook, I get a friend request from her. Haven't spoke to her since I left the 8th grade. No idea why she added me. Thought, well, maybe she adds all the kids she taught. Well, despite my graduating class having over 1,000 kids, we had no mutual friends. So I waited a while to accept it and then eventually did. Still no friends that were in my grade. Finally, I got creeped out and deleted her. Still have no idea why she did that. Makes me wonder if there was something more behind that. I'm gonna be honest, that dude dodged a bullet. If your teacher's trying to start something with you in 8th grade, that's a red flag right there. I'm surprised nobody got called. I work at an expensive school that teaches 4 to 7-year-olds. A few of my students have moms with husbands that work 80-hour weeks and become very interested in me. One in particular sent her daughter to school with skincare products. Cool? Chocolates, and wine on different occasions. She kept trying to hang out with me outside of school and wanting pictures of me and her daughter together. When she finally got the message that it wasn't happening, she pulled her daughter out of my class and had her quit the school. It was weird. When I was teaching high school level students, it was the reverse. A student had a crush on me. It made things awkward because a few others sensed it. Thankfully, by being consistent and not returning any signs of interest over time, it eventually cooled down and resolved. What's interesting though, is that most think it's always the teacher having feelings for a student when sometimes it's the opposite, and it places the teacher in a very uncomfortable, difficult position. If you ask me, it comes down to being professional. You're here to teach, not screw around with other kids. And if you're more focused on your students in that way rather than teaching them for the benefit of their health and the developing mind, then it's not going to help anyone in the long run. It even has the chance to irreparably damage your career. Basically, don't screw kids, it's that simple. Kind of reversed, but when I was in high school, I had a Spanish class that I was very advanced in given the material. The teacher would often tutor me directly and things seemingly got a bit flirty sometimes. We ended up actually hooking up one day after class. Homeschool was weird. Not a teacher, but when I was 22, I was the receptionist at a film school, university level, and had quite a flirty relationship with a few of the students, very male-oriented subject, and quite a few attractive ones. I ended up secretly going out with one of the students for 18 months. I would have lost my job if that had gotten out. I teach tutorials at university as a final year grad student. A student, who yes, I did find attractive, hit on me after our last tutorial, asking me out for coffee. I, with some reluctance because he was cute. For context, I am also a guy. Politely told him I'd be very busy the rest of the term, but he was welcome to email me next year to keep in touch if he wished. That'll be fine. He got the hint. No cute first year is worth throwing away the potential of an academic career. Also, our TA handbook has no rules for this sort of thing, and it really should. Never! The very thought makes me want to shower. Students are children, even the high schoolers. Yeah, I gave that one a funny voice, but seriously, don't screw kids. It's bad. Okay, thanks. Boring answer. I can safely say that I have taught some very attractive young women, but I've never been sexually interested. I mean, they are teenagers. What are they bringing to the party? Enthusiasm? I mean, they are like puppies. Cute, lots of energy, and no training. Sorry, I stopped shopping on the girls' floor immediately after I figured out where the women's department was. That's about the best way I could ever have heard someone put it. Not a teacher, but I have a story that's really odd. He was our grade 9 homeroom teacher. Let's call him Mr. Nee. Mr. Nee was married, had 2 kids and a darling wife who was a counselor at another school. A lot of people liked him, but he was known to choose favorites and non-favorites. I was a definite non-favorite, so I don't really have any kind words to say about him, but I digress. There was this one guy in our class. Let's call him Ev. Ev was a typical wannabe gangster kid, from the saggy jeans to the DC lid. He was actually a really nice guy, but had an attitude at the same time. Me and him have talked once in a while since finishing high school, and he seems to be doing well with his new girlfriend and job. But again, I digress. Remember how I said Mr. Nee had favorites? Well, let's just say the way he treated his favorites looked like crap compared to how well he treated Ev. Ev practically could do anything in that class while everyone else had limits, even the favorites. Ev could come in late to class, not answer questions, and eat and drink whenever he wanted in class. But the one thing I'll never forget is how Mr. Nee would look at Ev occasionally as the class worked on an assignment or test. I really wish I had a picture, then you would probably understand where I'm going with this. It was pretty obvious to the majority of the class Mr. Nee had a thing for Ev, but as you can probably guess, it never went farther than the awkward glance and smile. Ev was completely oblivious to all of this, as he was just happy to have a free class without worry. Who wouldn't be? Mr. Nee still works at my junior high, and sadly, I do run into him a lot on my walks to and from certain places. I'll never know for a fact what Mr. Nee's fixation on Ev was, and it's probably better I don't know. I would just like to know this was just his way of being very nice to a student and nothing else. I used to teach college, and once in every few classes there'd be a really attractive woman, an adult in her early 20s, but a student. Thing being, after 2 or 3 classes, I'd realize I had no attraction to her at all because she just seemed so immature and naive. I don't mean that to sound mean, but I'm attracted to people who have as much life experience as I do, or more. So, much younger people just entering college might look very attractive, and might indeed even be very intelligent, but their sense of what the world was based on cumulative experience seemed fairly limited. So I basically stopped being more than idly attracted to them, the way you'd be when you passed a pretty woman in your office. There was never any real attraction at all. I'm a student, but I have a story I had with my female teacher. I had a teacher who was very attractive. She was 25 years old, blonde, witty, funny, and was also the volleyball coach. She began to drive me to school because she taught there. We lived in the same neighborhood, and I was also one of her favorite students the year before. Not because of great grades or anything. Actually, the opposite, because I always screwed around in the class and made teaching, quote, fun and exciting for her. Her words, by the way. I also babysat her daughter, and her daughter loved me, so I had that going for me as well. Well, every morning before she took me, her husband, who worked as a garbage man, would be out working and her daughter was usually asleep, so we were alone most of the time. One day, as I watched her daughter and waited for her to get ready, she called from her room and told me to heat up the car and put her daughter outside. As I waited in the car for a while, I was getting pretty bored since her daughter was asleep and I went in to see if she needed any help. Well, I walked in and saw her walking from the bathroom to her bedroom completely topless and she locked eyes with me. I jokingly said, "Whoa, praise freaking Jesus," and did the triangle motion prayer thing and pointed towards the sky. She laughed as she walked back into her room. After this moment, she always seemed to be more flirtatious. She would talk closer to my face, held strong eye contact very often, and even started touching my leg. I reciprocated by also being flirty. I eventually switched schools at the end of the year, and we haven't had any contact since. Just recently, I had to get a recommendation letter for my applications, so I thought who better to ask than my favorite teacher, so I went over to her home. Her daughter had grown so much, and I've never seen a child so happy to see me. I sat down beside my teacher in the kitchen, and we talked for a long time, catching up on things. She said stuff like, "You've grown so much, and I missed you," which seemed mutual because I also missed talking to her. As her daughter watched TV, my teacher did the leg-touching thing again as she whispered about how she was a virgin until college, where she met her husband. She also said that her class is so freaking boring since I left, which I didn't think was completely true. I wasn't aware of it at the time, but I was rock hard and she noticed. She said praise Jesus and we both laughed. Then, she grabbed it through my pants. It stopped suddenly when her daughter came up and asked to play with me, so I agreed and I played with her as my teacher wrote the letter of recommendation. After a few hours, I hugged her and her daughter and left the house with an empty feeling. I feel like I could have completed my high school fantasy, but I decided not to that day, mostly because of the fact that she had a husband I respected, and I know I would be really freaking mad if I had a wife who had sex with another person, mostly with a high school student. However, if stuff ever goes wrong with the husband, I will mostly try again. We love a mature person who won't interfere with the married relationship. My 6th grade teacher had a crush on the student teacher that came to help out for a couple months. Although not obvious, they screwed, and he proposed to her in front of the class soon after. They got married and had a kid 2 to 3 years later. For clarity, they screwed outside the bounds of the classroom. The teacher was a total fox as well. I would have loved to park my punch buggy in her garage. Reading that sentence was vile. I work in a school and have never felt this way about a student, but I've known 2 teachers who fell for students, took it too far, and got fired. Each of them were profoundly unhappy people. It seems that's mostly the case for a lot of teacher-student relationships that went south. Outside of abuse of power, these relationships start up to fill a void or indulge an empty desire. 9 times out of 10, it was never about true love in the first place. They never end up pretty unless they're consenting adults, and even then, things can end up pretty strained if they're not communicating with each other. I was 24 and she was 17, and I never did anything, but I totally acknowledged to myself that she was very pretty and clever. It made me feel weird, but I didn't sexualize her or anything. It was more a thought that, wow, if I was 7 years younger, I'd totally be into her. Right, we got it, bro. It is one of the most flattering things for an attractive student to take an interest in a subject that you are teaching. She's an undergrad, and you're TAing a subject that you are deeply interested in. Sure, her questions are novice, but she is enthusiastic and curious about your nerdy field in which you basically toil alone. If you make it past the first year without doing anything stupid, the next year you TA the same class, you meet a whole new year of students, and then you realize that there's a whole new crop of attractive young neophytes who bear a striking resemblance to your first crush last year, and that you are probably going to give more or less the same assistance to your students as last year, until you realize that in class you are helping everyone refine their understanding and move on, while you toil with few peers in the same subject that many will superficially take an interest in and move on year after year. Dude, you good? You need some you need some therapy for that little session? My secondary school English teacher had a crush on me. It wasn't obvious, but I saw it. She was a BBW as classed by my friends. We were 14 at the time. I really did sexualize her and imagine sex with her. I would often stare at her thighs and extremely wide hips in class. She would often pick me out to answer questions and was more relaxed with me while a little strict with others, as if we were good friends. She was a good teacher, definitely. Fast forward a few years and I just finished college. I get a Facebook request from my English teacher. I immediately knew why she added me. She was 22 when she worked with us, and that was what I told my brain when I wanted sex with her. We hooked up and had sex. I lived with her for a couple of months. I moved out, had more sex, etc. That's it, really. She just waited until I was old enough, and honestly, she gave better head than any of the other girls I was with.
D&D players of Reddit. What is the most creative character you've seen someone play as? I once kidnapped a player character wizard and replaced them with a high-level illusion created by the BBEG. The player then had to control the illusion from the perspective of the BBEG. That's Big Bad Evil Guy, pretending to still be a member of the party. It was surprisingly effective. Just as they reached the BBEG, they were slowly realizing he wasn't helping much anymore. I played Esawemic back in college, and I loved that character. He was a druid, and thus could only carry wooden weapons. So, after thinking about it, I gave him a lance, and then proceeded to get every feat you could for a knight on horseback. Trample, charges, etc. I leveled like a monster class instead of a player class, aka slow as snails, but man, it was a hella fun character. He could do some insane damage by the end of the game, and if he had to get into close combat, he could do rake, bite for damage. My favorite part, though, were his 2 animal companions. The first was a weasel that took levels of thief. So it was our trap dismantler and eventually had vorpal front teeth, so it had a devastating bite attack. The second was, and I'm not kidding, a giant white blood cell. It had been magicked out of a giant and made even larger, and it rode around on my druid's back. As the group's healer, it would blob onto them and heal them with a few levels of cleric. Mind you, my druid was teamed up with the lizardman barbarian, who was surprisingly smart, and the fey bard that would drink anything put in front of him. which is how he ended up as a half-elf woman of a different alignment by the end of the game. The Fae had a long-standing thing about drinking anything put in front of him. The campaign was heading to a big showdown between our ragtag group and what we thought was a terrible wizard. As it turned out, she was a high-level alchemist and had been using her potions to do much of her deeds. Unfortunately, when she was gone, all of her potions were sitting there and the Fae decided, why not? Then panicked when he changed gender and drank something else, then another, and kept rolling hysterically on this table the DM had whipped up. A camel. Not just any camel, but a racing camel named Rocket Boots. We had a party member who was inconsistent about showing up for the games, and he showed up in the middle of a short campaign we were running after we had received a stolen racing camel. It's hard to say exactly what it was, but the guy went ham role-playing this camel, making camel noises and doing camel things. It was absolutely hilarious. I haven't done it yet, but I've always wanted to play as a true polymorphed chair. The chair was turned into a human, or any player race, and then started learning, maybe becoming a wizard himself. I don't know how anyone would ever know since the change becomes permanent, but if he ever walked through an anti-magic field, he would just turn back into a chair and be gone forever, and no one else would walk through there for fear of being turned into a chair. I played with a 100% randomly generated character. I had a decent combo of class and race, half-elf and ranger, but my stats were completely dysfunctional for a ranger. My worst stats by far were dex and wisdom. In fact, they were the worst in the group. I was the ranger that could do everything a ranger was not supposed to do, and nothing that a ranger was actually supposed to do. For one campaign, I played a gnome illusionist and put all the points into alchemy. With my starting gold, which the DM gave us way too much, and few limitations, I bought a riding dog, 2 saddlebags of holding, and then another for my own carrying. I spent the rest of my gold on all the mundane gear you could possibly imagine. I used a spreadsheet to track it because the DM was irritated. I had 3 years of food and water, 3 tents, 10 cots, a collapsible bathtub, gnome-sized, everyone else can bring their own, a collapsible chair and desk for scribing scrolls, a portable alchemist lab, all manner of rope, poles, tools, containers, and even a few weapons. I packed trail cakes, fine wine, and a few pounds of honey. I think the only other magic items I took besides the bag of holding was a firestone. Don't recall the exact name, but it produced a fire from small campfire up to huge bonfire and renewed the item after 8 hours or so. I wish that campaign had gone on longer. I really enjoyed pulling random stuff out of my bag and then making the DM refer to the printed copy I had handed him 2 weeks ago, showing that yes, I did in fact have half a pound of marbles. Well, at least you didn't lose them. Yeah, I gotta go. Bye-bye. My current campaign is made entirely from players who are new to D&D, myself included. So in building characters, my friend rolled mostly average stats, with the exception of intelligence, so he has a -3 in that. So we basically determined that he's illiterate. During our campaign, he also referred to the DM as God as a joke, and he kept asking questions like, "All right, God, what do we do about this?" So I made a joke that it looks like his character is actually communicating with God on a regular basis, but everyone around him just thinks he's insane and will never believe him. He then got the personality trait, Divine Guidance, which allows him to have a helpful hint once per campaign session. So canonically, his character can communicate with God, but to everyone else, he's just talking to himself as a result of his intellectual ineptitude. In plain English, a monk who fought everything by punching it repeatedly in the privates, Pathfinder monk with the maneuver master archetype who spammed dirty trick maneuvers. The look on the DM was priceless when they read the rules. Here's how it went. I tripped the tiger. Okay. Rolls the dice. Yep, the tiger's now prone. I elbow dropped the tiger in his fierce privates. Okay, so a regular unarmed strike. Oh, no. There are rules for that. No, there aren't. I beg to differ. The rules are this. You can attempt to hinder a foe in melee as a standard action. This maneuver covers any sort of situational attack that imposes a penalty on a foe for a short period of time. Examples include kicking sand into an opponent's face to blind him, pulling enemy's pants down to have his speed, or hitting a foe in a sensitive spot to make him sickened for a round.
Huh. I guess you can punch the tiger in the privates.
All the fights went from epic fantasy battles to this monk pocket sanding, private punching, and pantsing his way through every enemy. I don't know if there are any Joy Quest fans that are listeners to these kind of videos, but I was the dungeon master for Joy Quest, and I actually had a very similar situation to this. One of the players played literally as Jackie Chan, but he kind of named himself as like Jackie Chan. He actually had to fiddle around with this as well by implementing the way of the open hand in scenarios that weren't combat. So arm wrestling. So in one of the episodes, he actually tried to do like a bunch of different dexterity checks, and he tried to like slime and gum up his hands with a bunch of spit or some spilled ale, and basically try to cheat his way to the prize. Players. I've got a friend who is a weird character machine. Most recently is an orc named Sterog who believes that weapons are a coward's weapon, and beats people to their end with his shields. Before that was Robert the Destroyer, a barbarian who threw ladders at people. There was $3.50, or $3.50 to his friends, a really creepy monk who could shoot vines out of his hands like Spider-Man. Villigamish, a 5e warlock who halfway through a random goblin encounter realized he was terminating them for no reason and became a staunch defender of goblin rights. Harold the Great and Powerful was a bard who was absolutely useless, but invested everything in bluff and insisted he was a high-level wizard. Also had a penchant for buying people's souls and then pushing them towards positions of power. The Bear Witch Project, aka BWIP, or Bruce Berner, was a lycanthrope witch that spent most of his time in half-bear form. When asked what his gut feelings were on a topic, he responded with, "I have many feelings on guts." And of course, Justin Chandler, a shaman who saved literally all his gold till level 7, then used it to permanently enlarge and awaken his pet frog and deck it out with sweet gear. A player made a dwarf who was actually a very small human raised by dwarves. He was a barbarian and was modeled after Macho Man Randy Savage. He had a pet Wolverine, which he would throw at people screaming, "The fastball special!" The Wolverine didn't last too long. Randy, throughout the campaign, slowly went insane due to his fear of magic. Randy then began cutting people's hands off for no apparent reason, and the legend of Macho Man ended when he attempted to suplex a dragon. Suplexing a dragon. I mean, this sounds like an epic tale if you think about it. Just like this little man's like walking up this huge like ancient dragon just, "Mere mortals, they feared me for thousands of years. What will you do?" "I'll do like I always do. I'm gonna go in for that suplex. You need yourself a Slim Jim." And then unfortunately it's crushed. Wow, what a tale. It's been a long time, but as I remember it, my buddy was using Middle-earth as the setting. My character was an elf with polymorph abilities, hung out in Mirkwood, and while transformed as various woodland creatures, spied on passerby on behalf of Galadriel. Spending 100+ years in Mirkwood changed her into something a bit more enty. Not physically, just personality. Lazy. Likes to talk about trees. At this point, I wasn't tainted with min-maxing or metagaming, so I was more than content to make this weird, awesome elven forest woman with no social or combat skills and send her into an adventure based on subterfuge, navigating deserts, and combat. I was also interested in making an elven woman who wasn't the Tolkien archetype. More awkward, homely, blunt, super into trees and tree stuff, and not the usual, "let's make dope skyscrapers out of these redwoods" way, but more like, "let me tell you which tree sap tastes best right off the bark." So she ended up being whisked away, reassigned to an adventure in the east past Mordor, in a desert where, according to the DM, Tolkien's mentioned in only one paragraph blue wizards were hiding. She was very upset with her reassignment. Over the course of the adventure, because wizards, she got stuck as a parrot. Rode another character's shoulders. Perfect disguise. Lots of scouting, lots of complaining about not being in Mirkwood, and also being a parrot. Many Mirkwood facts. Mirkwood reminiscences, drawing maps of Mirkwood in the sand with a talon. The entire time, I had her advising the party that returning to Mirkwood would be the best option. That said, when the enemy least expected it, BAM! Sleep mist and trash talk punctuated with whacks, surprisingly effective. We never finished the campaign, so I like to imagine she just abandoned them at some point, and there's a colorful parrot flying happily around Mirkwood, perching on a character who's actually from Mirkwood, not Treebeard, who I've been reminded is from Fangorn. See, all I know is Mirkwood Squawk, nothing else. It was fun to think about this again after all this time. Now I'm probably going to remake her as an important NPC in my new wilderness adventure-based campaign. I don't know why, but for some reason when I imagine this very chill elven woman who's just so attached to the forest, whenever she's in this parrot form, I just picture Iago. So can you imagine that change between just hello, I am an old elven woman here to guide you on your path back to Mirkwood to, hey, you know what? I don't like being a parrot. This is ridiculous. Hey, let's go back to Mirkwood and check out the tree bark, huh? Blah! I once played a game where the players did not know any of their stats. Everything was run by descriptions like, you're really good at getting into places that you shouldn't. Picklock skill, or you're bleeding from several wounds and are nearly at death's door. If it were that kind of game, the players wouldn't necessarily know where they were. By the way, it was the best campaign I'd ever been a part of. The GM was a freaking genius. We were in the Marines together, and he got orders to go to Korea. When he came back, he no longer played and wouldn't associate with us nerds anymore. Dude was a natural, and I never found out just what happened. All I know is he didn't find religion, as suggested. I think he was met with anti-nerd peer pressure, which is funny because the nerds were also Marines, so there it is. A thief with one level of illusionist that passed himself off as an arch-wizard, throwing fireballs and screaming, "These beasts are immune to magic!" Ooh! In a fight, which was a funny experience. He was good at scamming NPCs, though. My character is similar to that, a thief that pretends that what he does is all magic. We were supposed to be infiltrating a cult that was gathering a presence in this town. The other people in my party joined the guard, and I was going to investigate the city's criminal underworld. And then I got distracted and ended up convincing a bunch of people of my magical power and how I can make them as good as me. So I became the kingpin of the criminal element in the city. It ended up not helping us find the cultists at all. But when we found them, I had an army. A necromancer who thought they were a cleric. Only the player and DM knew and had a list translating what the player said they were doing and what they were actually doing, i.e. spells, daily prep, so the others wouldn't catch on out of character. In his formative years, he came upon a book of forbidden spells. Being young and stupid, he assumed it was a book of divine rituals. Fast forward several years, and he wanders the land preaching about the everlasting life. He's skilled in first aid and potions because not every scrape requires divine intervention, but has some spells that will bring someone back from the brink of death. He also has a bodyguard who wears full plate armor, who follows him around because he owes a life debt. Doesn't talk much, though. The other players never discussed removing their own armor, or eating, or using the bathroom, so nobody found it odd that the NPC never did. The other players also never took points in Knowledge Arcane to discover the spell effects that didn't match what they should. Unfortunately, he got found out when one of the party members went down, and he turned them into a zombie. The players were then in on the joke and weren't able to separate what they knew and what their characters knew, which is why they weren't told from the start. If the party member hadn't gone down, there was a plan to have a personal quest, in a trial of faith style, to see if he could unintentionally turn himself into a lich, and if the party would help him do so. Mimic companions are what made me fall in love with the concept of tabletops and random chance. Just messing around with a friend of mine, he happened upon a mimic, fed it a live fairy that was annoying him, and it became his friend for life. That mimic NPC rolled natural 20s like it was his freaking job, and honestly, single-handedly carried the party, with a bit of help from a sentient severed goblin hand. For the rest of the series, all the players had terrible rolls for hours and just sat in wonder while Mimic and Handy wrecked a Lich Dragon. All hail the mighty luggage. There was a campaign where the party came across a magical cauldron filled with boiling gold. They were told they could drop an item in and it would be turned to gold while retaining all of its other properties and be imbued with intelligence. They were warned that the said intelligence might be malevolent. While the party debated what to drop in, the gnome rogue jumps in. He became gold-coated, which increased his armor class significantly, but also became cursed with an evil alter ego. There was much rolling to determine when and for how long he was forced to play as chaotic evil. I played a human fighter. He was a carpenter, had a wife and children. He was a really kind man, so kind in fact, he didn't carry a weapon. He was non-violent. His flaw, however, was that he had a massive malignant brain tumor pressing on his amygdala. Since they didn't have CAT scans in this universe, no one knew that he had inoperable brain cancer. Whenever our party was in a situation that caused great stress, like combat for example, my character would slip into a sort of trance and go on a rampage in the battlefield. He was absolutely stacked in combat, so he would absolutely clean the hell up when it hit the fan. The gentle carpenter would turn into a snarling, mumbling maniac who royally crapped on anyone who dared oppose him. He would come out of the trance with no memory of the fighting. Since he didn't carry a weapon, this required some creativity, so I made my character a master of improvised weaponry. Before combat, I would ask the DM if there was anything in the room I could lift above my head. Whatever was nearest is what I used as a weapon. Chair, stones, dead enemy's femur, you name it. My character was a whirlwind of bottles, debris, and the occasional small animal. A true force to be reckoned with. His name was Buin the Machine Rodriguez. Buin? I mean, I'm still invested. This is a very cool character concept. Kind of like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde scenario, but like with like actual medical knowledge behind it. But the name Buin throws me off. Is that like a short term for like brain, I guess? But I just can't help to be like, my name is Buin the Machine Rodriguez. So, you want me to use my fists, huh?
Parents with nanny cams, what have you caught your babysitter doing? This was my equivalent of pre-kindergarten. All the kids were regressing in their movement ability and getting really fat, so they set up spy equipment. Turns out one carer was doubling every baby's food portions and forcefully overfeeding them. Wish I had a nanny cam. My stepsister was watching my brother with disabilities for me. She would dump out the contents of his capsules meds and use them later. Didn't find out about it until he started having seizures constantly and ended up in the hospital for the second time. This isn't a bad one. My parents caught the babysitter carrying our 60-pound golden retriever like he was a baby. We caught our maintenance guy spooning with our 130-pound mastiff on the floor. We encourage their love as best we can now. Once, at the very last moment when no other babysitter was available, I hired one that was sort of notorious for not being good. Not dangerous or anything, like leaving the child unattended, but like the type where she would not console the child if they were crying or punish them for doing small things. By the way, I was very suspicious, so I was continuously glancing at the baby cam. The babysitter was playing with him, singing songs, and completely engaging him well beyond the way you would expect somebody who was considered a bad babysitter to act. Essentially, what happened was the babysitter got hired by a crazy parent who didn't like her at all, so they spread a bunch of mumbo-jumbo through the neighborhood. When I came home, I gave her a very large tip, and she was the one I always hired whenever I needed a babysitter. I've been a pretty regular weekend nanny for an amazing family for 4 years now. They cycle through a different couple weekday nannies since I've been with them. There is only one monitor, and it's in the little dude's room. Once the mom showed me on the camera why they let one go. Little dude said, "Mommy said I don't have to do that." And the nanny snapped back, "Well, it doesn't matter. Mommy's a dog." And then dragged the kid out of the room by his shirt. Super fired. Not a nanny cam because this happened in the 90s and I don't think we had them in Scotland then, but my mom came home early one day because she had become suspicious of our nanny as my sister and I never slept after a day with her. She found both my sister and I in bed in the middle of the day. Turned out my nanny had been dosing us up with child medicine to make us sleep all day so she could sit and do nothing. My mom put a nanny cam in my sister's bedroom. The only disturbing thing my mom allegedly saw was the babysitter crying while holding my sister. Turns out, the babysitter just had a miscarriage the day before. Well, a case which happened near where I live. Woman used to work, husband out of country. Had a 2-year-old kid. They hired a nanny to look after him during daytime. Day by day, kids started looking malnourished. So she set up a spy cam. Apparently, the lady used to bring her kid and feed him all the food left for the kid she was supposed to babysit. Then she would feed the kid cheap biscuits. She was promptly handed over to police. My story isn't that interesting, but I have a camera to check in on my rabbit when I'm not there. The biggest surprises were mostly just how almost nobody followed my pet sitting instructions. The one exception, ironically, was my brother who claimed to hate the rabbit and always wanted to get rid of it. I got an alert one day that my camera had detected movement while my bro was there taking care of him, and I decided to take a peek. I opened the app connected to the camera and saw my bro walk into my room, lay on my floor, and start playing with my rabbit. It just warmed my heart. We have cameras outside of our house. One day my neighbor told me that he saw my bunnies roaming the streets a few times. I didn't believe him, so I took a look. One time at work, I looked at the cameras and saw the gate slightly open, so I rewound the footage. I go to work super early, so I watched as my wife fed them, then got ready for work. The bunnies peeked around the side of the house and waited to see my wife's car leave, then they pushed on the gate hard enough for the latch to set free, then they left one by one. Later, before I got back home from work, they would make their way back and close the freaking gate. Smart little suckers. I never knew the gate latch was so weak, so I fixed that problem. A friend caught his nanny hitting their kid for interrupting that day's binge of the TV show Friends. I travel the US for work, and am fortunate enough to be able to bring my 2 beagles with me. They have never been away from my side longer than the time I've been at work. They are 10 and 13. I have a camera that I use to check in on them sometimes, mostly because my larger beagle is quite the ingenious guy. Opening doors, scooting chairs over places so he can jump up onto the counters, etc., etc. Last year I was in Oregon and had to go home to Michigan for an emergency. I do not fly with them, I will only drive. So I was in a pickle and reluctantly hired someone off of Rover that was willing to come stay over at my hotel room for 3 days. She was great, kept up on texting me about the dogs, said things like tossing them a ball right now, so I would check in via the cam when I thought it was appropriate. This woman was amazing. Not only was she playing with them enough to make them exhausted, she was even teaching them new tricks, making them use their brains to solve puzzles, and even got my 42-pound beagle to get up on her back so she could do push-ups. She was an avid CrossFitter. I was extremely happy. A little late to the party, but here goes. My mom suspected our maid of stealing the silverware, and she's just freaking nosy. Anyway, the maid was indeed stealing the silverware. I think that ended up being overshadowed by my dad screwing her though. Not me, but my aunt's friend set up a nanny cam because she noticed that every time she changed her child's diaper, the child would start crying a lot more than usual. Turns out when they watched the nanny change her diaper, she would use Clorox wipes if they were nearby instead of grabbing the baby wipes. For anyone wondering what happened afterward, they fired the nanny immediately and the father became a stay-at-home dad. We have a security camera in my bedroom for my free roam bunny so we can keep an eye on her whilst we work, if we go on holiday, etc. Well, my dad is 50 and is a big bloke who acts like he doesn't like pets, came over to visit one day whilst I was out. He went in my room and crouched down calling the bunny. He spent an hour trying to pet the rabbit and kept repeating in a soft voice, "I'm not gonna hurt you. I just want to pet you and see how fluffy you are." He just about crapped himself when I spoke through the security camera to tell him she's very fluffy. My family bought one to see our dogs when we leave on vacation twice a year. It's one where they can hear us and we thought it'd be great. We hardly used it. We also asked our maid to dog sit for us while we were out. Once when we looked at the feed, we saw the dog sitter there a solid 30 minutes early just petting the dogs and playing with them. She's since retired from working, but she was the sweetest old lady and we love her. Another time, my dad left a wad of cash on top of the washing machine, about $600, and she put a rubber band around it with a note saying he misplaced it. I was a nanny for a family for over 10 years. I moved 8 hours away, but sometimes I drive up to stay with them if they need me for a weekend. I miss the kids so much. I also babysat and house cleaned all through high school and college. I pride myself on never stealing a thing and never having laid a hand on a child. I'd rather maintain a great relationship and have guaranteed client base for years to come instead of a $20 object to pawn. Most they'd see me do on a nanny cam was picking my nose. This is a bit of a tangent, but has anybody ever seen the show Nanny 911? I remember when that show used to come on a few years ago, and it just blew my mind how irresponsible some of these parents were. And that's not even including how crazy the kids would get sometimes. We once caught the nanny putting charcoal to feed them as a snack. This woman claimed that she thought it was a snack. It was in a charcoal box. My brothers were 4. Chasing my cats around with a broom, hitting them. She's since been fired. From a cannon, I hope. My grandpa was staying with my parents, but they figured it best to hire the regular sitter to watch my younger siblings overnight since they didn't think my grandpa was up to the task, and they were attending a wedding a couple hours away and made plans to spend the night in a hotel nearby. They had set up a nanny cam in a couple rooms, my siblings' bedroom, the master bedroom, living room, and kitchen, all motion activated. They normally wouldn't bother looking through the footage if everything seemed fine upon returning home and their master bedroom cam had never been triggered before. When they returned, they noticed that the cam in the master bedroom had been triggered, so they decided to take a look, cut to footage of my grandpa and the sitter both naked, aggressively making out from the entrance of the room, staggering while intertwined towards the bed, and then about 20 minutes of banging on my parents' bed. The sitter was about 20 years old and my grandpa was around 70 at the time. My dad called me immediately after he saw the footage, laughing his butt off, and I could hear my mom crying in the background, completely mortified from what she had just witnessed, and shouting at my dad to throw out the sheets and kick out grandpa. My mom called the sitter to confront her, and she just apologized and said there was connection or some crap to that matter. When she asked my grandpa what he was thinking, he just said, "At my age, you must seize every opportunity." I wish there was audio for the build-up. I lay awake at night sometimes, just wondering what kind of game my grandpa was talking to get in that sitter's pants. I was the kiddo. My mom often tells the story of how she watched me give a big ol' hug to my babysitter who just broke down out of nowhere after serving me lunch. Turns out her dad had died a month back and it just wasn't a good day for her. I still remember you, Miss Yancey. I hope you're doing just fine now. The couple I sat for had a nanny cam in their living room, the kind that went in teddy bears. They got me on video giving their 2-year-old the Heimlich after he tried to eat a rock. We have a nanny cam, and we caught our nanny dancing with our baby, making him laugh and giving him kisses. She's the best, and the cameras give us the peace of mind to know she really treats him like her own. I pay my neighbor to feed the stray cats in my garden when I'm away for days at a time, and the camera caught my neighbor trying to come in by pole vaulting one time. He nailed it, amazingly. I got a nanny cam to keep an eye out for my elderly grandfather, especially when the home aides were there. My grandfather started asking for lots of cash and couldn't remember what was happening to it. A brooch that my aunt was supposed to get disappeared, and then I heard reports of my grandfather being inappropriate with some of the home health aides. He was busted, squirreling away his medication that he was supposed to be taking in his chair, giving money to an aide, and inappropriately harassing another aide. We didn't have a nanny cam, but my mom set up the camcorder when she suspected her babysitter was stealing, and then caught the babysitter stealing. She returned most of the stuff and my mom threatened to report her to the police. I think she should still have reported her anyway. Now she probably just went on stealing at other people's places. The family I nanny for told me that their previous nanny got caught doing loads of awful things. The couple that outraged me most were 1, leaving their 3-year-old daughter in the tub with water up to her chest for 2 hours every day while she sat in another room unable to see said child. And 2, once she went to run an errand with the same kid, and their doorbell camera caught her putting the kid in the car seat, not buckling her, and peeling off. The mom said you could see the toddler trying to buckle herself in before they took off. Edit. Number 1. The camera was not in the bathroom. It was where they were able to see where the nanny was, room near bathroom, and their kid if the door was left open, which it always was while she was bathing. Number 2. They thought she was a perfectly good nanny until their kid was saying weird things that were going on, and they decided to watch the footage. They fired her after seeing what she was doing, and that's where I, Super Nanny, came in. The cameras weren't actually for the nanny. They were for the kid's therapist because she was prone to violent behavior and they were trying to fix it. My aunt has a nanny cam and found my older cousin's babysitter playing blackjack with him. She lost $50. I've caught her making pillow forts that are heavily resistant to the monsters that may or may not come out during heavy thunderstorms with my kiddo, 20 minutes after bedtime. Needless to say, she was dealt with appropriately. I'm not a parent, rather the child, and I had this nanny, or Yaya as we would call it. It became useless because she soon found out and kept unplugging the camera. It turns out she was slowly stealing money from the family. We fired her. I was the child, and there weren't any nanny cams, but my parents had left a small bucket of toys and things to keep me busy, and they hired a babysitter to watch me while they both had to take overtime at work and knew they would be gone most of the day. The babysitter moved that bucket of toys to another room, put me in a crib, and proceeded to go off and read or something and left me there for hours with nothing to do, only coming back to check on me or feed me. My parents came back to me just sadly sitting in my crib. Indoor cameras hooked up to the same unit as the outdoor cams. Husband was walking to his study, saw a giant huntsman spider, Australian here, and screamed like a little girl and jumped away. Needless to say, I bolted to the computer to watch the playback on repeat for a few minutes. I laughed so hard I had an asthma attack. She stole a single puzzle piece of what we were trying to solve. Saw her put it in her pocket. Final straw was one of our freaking potted plants. Who goes out of their way to steal a potted plant? Hello? I'm glad I stopped babysitting before cameras became a thing. A couple I sat for had adorable kids, but the dad had one room in the house devoted to a full model railroad setup. Dozens of trains, bridges, teeny villages, the works. After they went to bed, and during that long, boring stretch before the parents came home, I just played with the train set. Only regret is that I couldn't toot the horns because the kids would have busted me. Not a parent and not a nanny cam, then why are you commenting on this post? But my uncle once set up a wildlife camera, the ones that hunters use, to get a photo of something happened in my great-grandmother's apartment. She was very demented, so she told us incoherent stories about how there were people there stealing all of her liquor and chocolates. Turns out, she was the one who stole the goodies, but we also found out her other son, my other uncle who no one has contact with due to his shady actions with his wife, had a key to the apartment and was regularly visiting at midnight to steal some jewelry. Friends of ours don't have kids, but have dogs. They were going out of town and told the dog sitter about all the cameras, including the one that is outside, but sometimes picks up reflections and will actively notify them of motion. The dog sitter seemed to get it, but she forgot to convey that to her boyfriend, who came out and walked around naked quite a bit. I was the one caught in the camera a few times. Number 1. A family who had bunnies caught me on camera booping noses to the beat of the song I was singing, little bunny foo-foo hopping around the kitchen, picking up all the lettuce and munchy munch munch. Number 2. A different family saw me get freaking tackled by their 95-pound Mastiff puppy, and they immediately called me to make sure I didn't have a concussion since I just kinda laid there for a while. I was fine. I just got the wind knocked out of me. Number 3. Yet another different family saw me reading a book to their kids and later complimented all the voices I make. I had no idea they could hear audio and I got so embarrassed since I really did go all out. When I was around 12 years old, my parents caught my babysitter on camera stealing my NES games and shoving them into her pants and shirt. They confronted her about it and she kept denying it until Ninja Gaiden fell out of her pant leg. My mom took her into a room and made her take out all the games she stole. She literally had games shoved under the strap of her bra on her back so that she could sneak them out of the house, and others were put inside the waistband of her underwear. She must have really thought about this for a while. Anyway, we got the games back and she was sent home without pay. I dog sit for some neighbors, one of which told me she has a camera in the living room/dining room for her dogs. You know those ones that dispense treats? Anyways, I thought it was a strange essential oil diffuser until she told me what it was. I was being paid to play with them for an hour, but she found out that I was actually staying for 2 or 3 hours. When she asked me about it, I think I said something like, I'd want someone to do the same for my dog. Ever since then, she leaves me treats in the kitchen and even got me a Christmas present from the dogs. She picked up our pug Doogie and was dancing around the living room with him while that Carly Rae Jepsen song was playing. My uncle told me this once when a babysitter was holding his daughter, my older cousin, when she was a baby. The baby was playing with the toys, and she somehow swallowed a small piece of something, and the babysitter performed the Heimlich but for babies. She saved my cousin, and her family was thankful. They have no idea where the babysitter is now, but right now she's supposed to be around her late 40s. Edit. I asked my uncle about this, and apparently they know where the babysitter is. She's in California, and she is a very well-paid doctor and makes over $310,000 a year as a physician. That's the only thing he knows since she left. Not a nanny cam, but the baby monitor managed to catch our then 1.5-month-old projectile vomiting on me, and then straight up into the mouth and on the face of my husband 2 minutes later. When she put my daughter down for a nap, she took a nap on the bed next to her. This is just so cute. Caught the babysitter rubbing one out on our couch. The babysitter was/still is my female cousin. I figured the best thing was to just say nothing, save the awkwardness. She did it a fair amount. I then mentioned our house cam by accident some months later and her face dropped. I realized what I'd said, then casually threw in that I never checked it, again, to save the awkwardness. A colleague of mine saw that when his 8-month-old baby cried, the nanny just ignored him and kept watching reality TV, not paying any attention to him while he bawled his eyes out. She did not attempt to console him or anything. She just tried to hear the TV. There were a few other troubling instances too, like she'd say they went on a brief stroll but disappeared for hours with no explanation, or she didn't follow the parents' instructions on how to put him to sleep and let him cry, and my colleague realized that the baby was anxious and desperate every time the nanny arrived. Heartbreaking, really. Not a nanny cam, but a vid. My sister-in-law sat the camera down thinking she turned it off. I have over an hour of her teasing my toddler in a mean way with candy and popsicles. She started telling him that he would get some, then hold it just out of reach. She then ate it in front of him, making sounds. She was also calling him mean and weird names like Turd Muncher and Ricky Stupido. The camera got all the audio, but only some video. At the end of the video is when we got home. When I confronted her with the video, she started claiming I doctored it, that I was a liar, a jerkwad, and hated her because she was prettier than my wife. She is not. That was the last time she was allowed around either of our kids unsupervised. She was the sister-in-law for 10-ish years and is now the crazy Karen ex-sister-in-law. I can't have her presence on social media because she attacks me all the time and says lies. I'm also estranged from my brother because of her. 10 years of her warped his perception of our family. He still thinks some of the whacked out things she accused our dad, sister, other brother, and various other family members of were true. No reasoning has convinced him of the truth, not even the thought that if video evidence refutes some of the claims, then all can be considered suspect. I may get comments and advice of what I could do, but in the end, you can't fight crazy, and sometimes life is just not fair. The only thing I have done to make things better is ignore her. She eventually just starts attacking someone else, like an annoying yipping dog that just needs to annoy. As for my brother, I hope time will help to fix things. I also think that he might just be more like her than I think. Birds of a feather fly together. Oh man, this next one is actually so wrong and so messed up. Sitting on our couch playing with the dogs like we paid them to. I have a nanny cam for the purpose of creeping my dog while I'm at work, but it's how I discovered my former superintendent was coming into my apartment randomly to steal a nug from my jar of red eye. Friend caught hers rummaging through her closet and stealing a blouse. She confronted her about it when she returned home, and the woman played innocent. She was wearing the freaking blouse. Remember that post from before, you can't fight crazy? Yeah, I think that applies here. We hired a dog sitter over the Thanksgiving holidays to check on the pooch, feed the cats, get the mail, etc. Edit, definitely pointed out the various security cams to her. She asked if she could bring her sister along for company. We said sure, no problem. The sister, we found out in conversation, attends a nearby hyper-conservative fundamentalist school. When the hired sitter took the dog out and the fundy sister had the house to herself, she took the opportunity to scream, "Frick!" at the top of her lungs a few times. Not a lot else. Just paced around the living room dropping high-decibel F-bombs. Gotta find some way to vent that fundy angst. Watched her outside playing with my dogs. She was dog-sitting. Our yellow Labrador and golden retriever puppies started munching the blueberries right off our blueberry bushes. They know dang well they're not supposed to get into the blueberry patch. We watched our dog sitter run over to them to try to get them to stop. She then ran outside and ran back out with the bowl. She proceeded to race the dogs for the blueberries. Had to be one of the highlights of our trip. We came home to a bowl of blueberries in the fridge and 2 very guilty puppers. My friend is a nanny, and sometimes she takes the small human she watches and has her dance for the parents randomly in front of the camera or wave since it is a Google Hub and has photos of the parents. Small gifts for the parents to find if they review the video from that day. Not my kids, but my sister's. This was when my nephew was still very young and my sister was still breastfeeding. Long story short, my sister caught the babysitter drinking her breast milk. She had her suspicions because my nephew would go through twice as much milk when the babysitter was taking care of him. My sister set up the camera and caught the guy in the act. Apparently the guy was some sort of fitness nut and had read that breast milk could be very beneficial. As weird as it sounds, my sister ended up working out a deal with the guy. She got him to drop the price of watching the kid in exchange for a bit of breast milk every now and again. I have cameras all over the inside and outside of my house. It came standard with the Ring doorbell. Next came critter cams I put near my bird feeders, then cameras everywhere. I used them mostly to look for the wild bunnies in my yard, and to see the owl leave its roost at night. The indoor cameras are dog cameras. My wife and I use them to view and talk to our dogs while at work. The weirdest thing I've caught my dog doing? I made a batch of jerky, put it in a large Ziploc bag, and placed it in the dining room table in preparation for a camping trip. My 19-pound Shih Tzu, which is large for a Tzu, was caught on video moving a dining room chair, jumping up onto it, then jumping onto the table. He ate the entire bag of jerky, leaving only the bag. He did this in less than 10 minutes. My babysitter took the kids out of the house and claimed she went to the park. Turns out she took them to a friend's house without car seats. I'm a nanny, and it is in my contract that all cameras must be disclosed. Any undisclosed camera I find will immediately void the contract. That being said, if I get thrown up on, pooped on, painted on, food on, whatever on me, I need to know what is a safe area to change so that my bosses don't get a show they aren't paying for. People opposed to this are not people I work for. One of my exes and her mom had to leave town for a week and they had 3 cats. One only had 3 legs because he got hit by a car, poor timid little thing that hid all the time and refused to come out, and a dog that had diabetes. They hired someone just to come over once in the morning and once at night to feed, let the dog out and give the dog his medicine. They had cams, I'm not sure why they put them in place, and found that the guy stayed there all day just playing with the animals and even got the timid cat to come out and cuddle with him. They showed me the videos of him arriving and all of their pets rushing to the door to meet him. I house/dog sit for friends of my parents. The first time I did it, they mentioned they had a security camera by the front door that was motion activated, and I didn't really think anything of it. They were gone for a few weeks, they come home, their 2 giant huskies are happy, I get paid, and all was well. A couple weeks later, my mom calls me laughing and laughing. My parents had dinner with the friends I dog sit for, and they showed a video to my parents from the front door cam. Apparently, all it showed was me sprinting full speed down the hallway, a dog toy in hand, biggest stupid grin on my face, followed by the 2 huskies running and sliding after me, followed by me, followed by the huskies, over and over and over and over again. I sit for them as often as I can. Not a nanny cam, but a camera in my sister's room when she was a toddler. She had a habit of getting out of her toddler bed, so me, my dad, and my mom would watch it, and every time she got up, we'd all say, "Go back to bed, Serena." It was funny to see her reaction. I was the babysitter. I used to look after the daughter of a couple who played tennis with my uncle. They were super rich and went out all the time. The kid would go to bed at about 7, then I would sneak a bit of booze from their well-stocked bar. I wouldn't drink it on the job, but I'd pour it into my water bottle to take to my next party. It happened on and off for about 3 years. Then one night, they must have changed their security system or something, and I got busted. They were very chill about it, seeing as I clearly didn't drink it while watching their kid, but told me they could get in trouble for supplying.
How do you subtly duck with people? When my dad was a mechanic, people would come in and describe a noise their car is making. It's kind of going screech. My dad would close his eyes and make them repeat the noise over and over while listening intently, saying, "Keep it up. I think I almost got it." Until they're basically out of breath from all this weird-sounding gibberish coming out of their mouths. Imagine other professions trying to do this. "My God, what's wrong with the engine? We have to get this plane off the ground." "Well, it kind of..." Yeah, spit it out." "Well, it kind of sort of goes like..." I don't know what's going on." Sir, listen. "Yeah?" "You're an idiot." I used to have CCTV monitors in my office at a pretty large store, so I would call different departments and hang up right before they picked up the phone and call them back as soon as they turned around. After a few tries, they would stand and wait for the phone to ring again, but I'd wait until the exact second they turned around. Nobody ever found out who it was. Easily the best entertainment ever. When someone sneezes, I tell them to shut up, and they almost always reply, "Thank you," because they are so used to other people saying, "Bless you." Hi, narrator here. I know it's so short, but it's just the idea. This is so funny. Just, shut up. Thank you. Or I wonder what if it got even like more aggressive, just like, achoo! Shut up! Thank you. I work in pathology, and I spend most of my day dictating into a microphone. I keep myself entertained by messing with the ladies in transcription in a myriad of ways. One thing I like to do is pick a random word and slightly mispronounce it all day just to mess with their heads. One time, we received a tube of chapstick, a small tube of toothpaste, and a bottle of skin lotion that the ER had taken out of someone's backside. Not sure if they were a little freaky or just mentally ill. After I dictated that case and described the items, I went to the gift shop and bought the same items and then left them on their desk with a note that said, "No need for these to go to waste." They were confused, but had used the hand lotion. By the time they listened to the dictation, I could hear them shout from down the hall. Also, since I recite a lot of case numbers, anytime a number happens to have 666 in it, I will immediately say, "Mark of the Beast!" and use my phone to play an evil laugh and sounds from hell. On Halloween, I taught myself how to say a couple of sentences backward and then recorded it and played it backwards into the microphone. That one freaked them out a bit. If there is ever a really good joke on Reddit jokes, I will end my dictation for the day by telling the joke to them. I also like to do prank calls. I'm the peanut butter jelly guy. When I'm on a waiting list at a restaurant, I always put the name down as Parpar. About half the people kind of hesitate or look at you weird. Play it straight and just spell it out if that happens. When you're called over the loudspeaker, it sounds like they're stuttering, "Parpar, party of four?" You can also do weird funny names that are just barely believable. Yes, people, obviously not every restaurant says party. Use another name for those. As far as the loudspeaker goes, I mainly use this at a very busy breakfast joint on the weekends. They have outdoor waiting and therefore announce names. It will work for any type of calling out names. I have a pretty good memory when it comes to stories that my friends have told me, so I like to retell their own story to them a year or two later, now starring myself, and see how long it takes for them to catch on. They start off with a look of, "Oh man, I could tell some of the story as soon as he ends this." Then it turns into a look of, "Wait, that's my freaking story!" A buddy of mine will randomly wish me happy birthday on Facebook when it's not my birthday. So then a bunch of other people wish me a happy birthday and I have to explain it's not my birthday. This ducker does it every year. A couple of weeks ago, he posted on my wall, "Congratulations, man. I knew you'd land that opportunity. So proud of you." That followed by a couple dozen people asking me what had I accomplished. I had someone whose birthday was a day before mine. At 11:45 p.m., as we ate dinner, I pointed out it was his birthday, and without question, the staff did the song, dance, and clap. At 12:01 a.m., he then told them it was my birthday. The server demanded ID, then I got a very, very unenergetic song, dance, and clap. I swear, even the cake looked slump. Best proof I ever had that servers hate that crap. Make up a hobby or skill for your friend. Over a period of weeks or months, nonchalantly describe your friend's aptitude at this skill to your common friends or colleagues. If you pick something general enough, your friend will encounter lots of questions and it might snowball. Examples: Dan is a very good artist. He painted this for me. Show them a picture of some art someone else painted. Did you hear Dan won an award for his artistic skills? Dan is actually a really good singer. He sung in that state championships last summer. Did you know Margaret fixes washes? Bonus points if you pick someone you only vaguely know. Then you can deny starting the rumor and blame someone that knows him even better. In public places like malls or grocery stores, I nonchalantly thank random people. I say, "Hey, I saw what you did back there, and I just want to say thanks. That was great." Most people don't appreciate little things like that anymore, but I do. Then walk away. Bonus points if you pat them on the back. I knew a friend that did this once because he lost a bet and went, "I just want to thank you," and awkwardly handed him $5 and walked away. Use a fake name when ordering food for delivery. Use a different name each time, but always use the same number. After a while of doing this, they get a huge list of names after putting your phone number in whatever system they use. Pay cash each time. You can hear them hesitate for a moment as they try to figure out why there are so many names with different last names as well. Usually they'll ask if you're the person that's the most recent on their list. Always say no and give them a brand new name. I also like to use names that sound weird in a fake kind of way but aren't super obvious. Chester Elegante, as an example. At the Varsity Chicken Wings joint nearby Syracuse U, would enter name as Icarus for the announcement, "Icarus, your wings are ready." I used to work in a call center a few years ago. We had to take customers' details and I'd always repeat back to them to make sure they were correct. While I was doing this though, I'd duck with them by saying things like, "Oh, is that K for knife? P for pterodactyl? Yeah?" Good old silent letters. Get them heavily involved in a good conversation while standing, and just hand them something. Don't look at it. Keep the conversation going, keep eye contact, and hand them anything, from a tennis ball to a rock you just picked up. Almost every time they'll grab it without thinking. Works even better if talking and walking. See how much stuff they can hold. Keep looking at a spot a few feet behind them with a worried expression. Look back at them and smile again. Look 3 feet behind them this time. Look a little more scared. Repeat and escalate until they get really uncomfortable and look behind them. It works even though they know you're messing with them. There was one guy in the music department who would always leave his phone on whatever desk he was working at. Every single time I'd walk by, I'd pick it up and move it slightly, no more than 6 inches away, and keep walking. I never took it. I never moved it far. I did this several times a day for several months. Then I stopped. I walked by and instinctively he went to put it back and missed. The look of shock on his face made my life. A family opened this small local theater, and we went a couple of times during October and watched Annabelle and Nightmare on Elm Street. After everyone got deep into the movie, the staff would sneak up behind us, dressed in black, and duck with us pretty hard. Their kid crawled as fast as he could down the row seats and rubbed up against our legs. That was the best one. It was freaky, but hella fun. I don't know, man. I think that would be kind of crazy to send your kids into the dark theater to mess with people as they're watching a scary movie. What if somebody stomped their foot down to the child going, "No, not today, Annabelle! Grr!"
No, please. I didn't mean to.
That's a lawsuit waiting to happen. Why would you do this? No! Stop! I had a roommate in college that rarely went out to drink, but when he did, he got completely trashed and usually ends up having no recollection what had happened. So whenever we would be drinking together, I take a handful of leaves from outside and hide them in his room in places like under his laundry pile, under his bathroom sink, in his jacket pocket, toaster, in the closet, etc. He still thinks he has a leaf hoarding habit whenever he goes out to drink with us. Wait, you had a toaster in your closet? I saw this on another thread. Can't remember the name of the hilarious person who wrote this, but start out with a subtle lisp when talking to someone you usually see on your own and when others aren't likely to be around when you speak to them. Over the coming weeks, make the lisp more prominent until you can barely be understood by that person. When it has become so bad that they cannot at all understand you, just drop it. Start talking normally again. The guy who's been trying to figure out what you're saying will be so confused. If he asked about it completely, deny it. Act baffled each time he brings it up. Bonus points if he starts asking other people. For example, Steve and Jerry, starting with Steve. "Hey, Jerry, you know the guy from accounting?" "Yeah, dude. What about him?" "You've heard his lisp, right? He's not got one anymore." Jerry gives a weird look. "Dude, he's never had a lisp. I don't know what you're talking about." Steve will be completely mind-ducked. You could also apply this to having a weird accent that suddenly drops. Not a real accent, just a really weird, unrecognizable accent that nobody can figure out. I really love bananas. I take a couple with me every day to work for mid-morning snacks. I decided to make it a habit of taking a break every time I was eating one to stroll over to a coworker's desk, chat with her while eating, and throw the peel into her garbage bin before walking back to my desk. She would deal with the smell for the rest of the day. It took a week before I got a, "If you throw that in there, I'm gonna end you." I mean, dude, I don't know. I might feel the same. I have a very sensitive nose, and if you're coming over and just dumping your crap into my garbage can that I have to work next to for the whole day and be like, "No, that is not a funny prank. That is a disaster. Please don't do this. Please, just no." If you're in a group of people, all of you line up along both sides of an exit. When someone walks out, everyone start clapping and cheering for the person. Some friends and I did this on the subway metro in Singapore while waiting for a train. Some of the reactions are priceless. My one friend and I refer to every animal as kitty, or some variation of it, i.e. wolves are howling moon kitties, meerkats are stand-up kitties, and obviously ferrets are snake kitties. We often ducked with people, like one time when I insisted that this girl's gross dog was a slobber kitty. She was super proud of having this purebred dog, so she was getting quite flustered over the whole thing and practically yelling the breed of her dog at me. The first friend I mentioned walks in after not having heard this argument, and the girl says to him, "You can tell what breed my dog is, right?" And he replies, "Slobber kitty," without missing a beat. She got so mad. Definitely a subtle one, but I like it. I work in a restaurant. As a servant to the public, it's easy to get down on your job. Subtle things really help make you feel less like a backside-kissing peasant. Almost every time I run a tray of food, I make eye contact with the nearest table that's waiting on food and give them a look and smile as if I'm coming right for them to deliver their meal. Then I pass right by them and take it to the actual table. I love when people interrupt their conversation with, "Hey, here's our food," only to be left disappointed. A little sociopathic, considering most of these people didn't do anything to me, but it's just a nice way to feel in control at a job where you are so often walked on. "It was you! You did this to me! Oh, come on! I've definitely had this happen to me somewhere before. No! Now I know your tricks. Now I know. I'm gonna watch you and bring hey, you get back here! Ah!" I looked after my buddy's house when he was on vacation. I took every photo out of its frame, scanned it, photoshopped me in somewhere, printed them, replaced in frames. Months after he got back, he called me saying his brain was telling him something was wrong, but he rarely looked at the photos anymore, so it didn't click until his sister was over and saw the altered photos. One of my best friends is generally quite impatient, and for the last 8 years, I've been purposefully waiting for the last ring whenever he phones me to answer because I know he hates it. The best part, though, is I periodically tell him every so often that I'm doing something that he hates to duck with him, but I'm not telling him what it is, which drives him nuts as he can't figure it out and often insists I'm lying. I do a bunch of things to mess with him, but this is my fave as it's the longest running, lowest effort, mildest inconvenience that gets maximum annoyance. When we're closing down my store, there's a small vestibule at the back door where we have to stand still for about 20 seconds so that we can arm the motion alarm before leaving. As a rule, no one can be in the store alone, and so some employee always has to be with me for this process. I fart every single time. If they move, then the alarm won't set and we have to stand there even longer. In high school, I would sit in the back with my buddies, and whenever we had a substitute, I would sit completely still with my mouth gaping open until drool started pouring out slowly and dripping all over my notebooks. Sub would have zero idea why someone with such a seemingly debilitating mental handicap was in a regular class. Of course, they were far too uncomfortable to say anything that might suggest something was wrong with me. On a side note, I never did the deed in high school. I was once inspired by a post here on Reddit where someone replaced one of their family portraits with a picture of Vladimir Putin. One day when our parents were at work, my brother and I did the same thing by changing out a picture of ourselves with one of Putin bottle feeding a baby goat. We thought it was inconspicuous enough to go unnoticed for a little while, but we both gave it less than a day before our parents would notice. 6 months later, I'm in the middle of my college semester and I get 2 texts. One from my brother saying, "They found Putin," and the other from my dad saying, "You clever plastard." I used to manage a fleet of company cars. One of my friends who worked with me had a car for my fleet. He doesn't know I had spare keys for all of them. The parking lot is not large. You can fit about 50 cars in it. They're all company cars, and there's no reserved parking. So, being the friendly jerk I am, shortly after he arrived at work, I would go out for my smoke break and move his car over 1 or 2 spots. Sometimes I would even reverse the car back into the same spot, if he went in front first. I shuffled his car around the parking lot every 3rd day for about 4 months straight, but never too far from his initial spot. One day after work, we were at the pub getting a pint. He says to me, "Man, I'm so tired when I get to work. Sometimes I can't even remember where I parked my car." It's been almost 2 years to this day. I still move his car, but I've reduced the frequency to about once a week. He still doesn't know. In my apartment building, there is an unprotected Xfinity Wi-Fi. I have my own Wi-Fi, so I never connect to that one, but for some strange reason, one day, my phone connected to it on its own. So not knowing it did that, I started watching YouTube on my phone and accidentally hit the Chromecast button at the top of the screen. And when I pressed it, it gave me 2 different smart TVs to cast to. I had a huge evil grin on my face. So first, I immediately searched a Rickrolled video and casted it to one of the TVs. I thought this was hilarious, but I wanted to be more clever. I started playing all sorts of different videos. Girl ripping out her hair with a drill while eating corn, 2 frap videos, South Park videos, 4 words, all uppercase. Halfway through the last video, the connection ends. I guess they finally figured out how to turn it off. So the next day, I came home from work and checked my mail, and next to all the mailboxes was a very angry letter to the whole building. Really me. Can't remember it word for word, but it said something like, "Whoever the rumpole is putting videos on our TV, please stop! We have young kids, and now they are repeating the inappropriate language that was in those videos." I immediately bust out laughing in the middle of the hallway, and believe me, I will be doing it again. I had a coworker once who was a real jerk. I started making fun of bald customers, to their face in a friendly manner. It was a cigar store. Making light is mandatory, on a frequent enough basis when he was around to make him think I really got grossed out by bald people. I don't, and I think I'm probably going bald. It was all part of my long con. After I got him thinking about baldness on a regular basis, I brought in my shills. I talked to customers I was friends with. Under my instruction, they'd always stare at his hair when they saw him or ask, "Did you get a haircut or something?" Every time they'd talk to him, we went to the same barber. Neighborhood dude, cut his first cigar. So I talked to the barber into asking him, "So, you want me to do anything about, like the thin parts?" After 6 months of this, he was constantly checking his hair in the mirrors, the glass around the shop, asking all the darn time if I thought he was balding. It was hands down the most sociopathic and impressive thing I have ever done in petty revenge. It was like a total of 9 months of work, involved half my customers and eventually the owner of the store. He had the thickest hair I've ever seen. People complimented him on it. But that jerk farted in my face one time while I was eating quiche, and you don't duck with a man's quiche. Wow. So this man literally went Liam Neeson on this. Like this guy just like walking around and just being dumb. Be like, "Ah!" And he just looks up, his quiche ruined. "Darn you. I will remember this day. Revenge is best served cold. Just like my quiche, which is now cold and smelly."
What is the creepiest glitch in the Matrix you've experienced? I mentioned this in another thread, but here it is again. Me and my friend were at a Chinese restaurant, and we ordered a General Tso chicken dinner and shrimp lo mein dish. When we sat down, we took out both boxes and set them on the table about 2 feet apart. My friend opens the first box, and we see a shrimp lo mein dish. It has all the things in there: noodles, shrimp, fried rice. He closes the box and opens the other box. Inside that box is another shrimp lo mein dish: shrimp, noodles, fried rice. Oh, I think, they must have mixed the order. I was just about to say this when my friend says out loud, "Looks like they made a mistake and gave us 2, as he opens up the first box again. Inside of it is a General Tso chicken dinner order: General Tso chicken, white rice, and an egg roll. He froze and looked at me. I looked back at him, and we sat in silence. It took us 5 or so minutes to collect ourselves. I have no idea what the frick happened. Not creepy, but so vivid and distinct that I still think about it years later. I had a, subjectively, long, involved dream where I was a vendor at a fish market. I remember getting up early, dressing, doing a whole morning routine, going to get tea, heading out to the docks, buying fish, loading them in a cart and going to get ice, then haggling for ice, buying some less fresh fish while I was at it, then going to a market to my stall, setting up and selling fish all day. It was so real. I talked to friends, smoked nasty cigarettes, haggled customers, ate lunch, had tea, and just lived through the day. At the end of the day, I cleaned up, counted my cash, paid the stall rent, went home, cooked some of the fish I hadn't sold, along with some veggies and rice that I traded for. I drank more tea, relaxed for a while, then drew a hot bath, soaked and smoked some more cigs, then went to bed. The next morning, I woke up refreshed, ready to go down to the docks to buy fresh catch. Except I was in my house, next to my wife, truck parked outside, and it was Saturday. No work. My wife and I were getting geared up to go skiing in Oregon and the car was already packed. Weird thing was, in the dream, I was single and a smoker. I'm not. And the whole long dream had been in fluent Chinese. The effortless kind of fluency that only comes from a lifetime of speaking it. Oh, and I had been Chinese. I'm a big, hairy white dude, somewhat fluent in Spanish, and I know a little bit of Russian, but it was just weird. I've never worked in a fish market. I wonder who I was. I wonder what that was. I've experienced deja vu a couple of times when I was younger, and while that is certainly freaky, nothing beats the opposite. Jamais vu, which I experienced twice during a period of work-related stress a few years ago. On both occasions, I was driving in my car in perfectly familiar surroundings near my home, when suddenly I had no idea where I was or where I was going. It was like being instantly teleported to a foreign country. It only lasted seconds, but very creepy nonetheless. Until it happened to me, I had no idea that this even existed. Edit, for those of you concerned about my health. Yes, I did see a doctor, and so should you if something like this happens to you more than once or lasts longer than a few seconds. My episodes were stress-induced, but more serious conditions can also cause the symptom. Edit 2. If you're on drugs, well, there's your problem. Oh boy, you guys would love where I work. Weird things happen here all the time, but I'll just talk about one of the creepiest moments I've experienced here. I work as a security/nighttime attendant at an apartment building. It's 24 stories and one of the oldest buildings in the city. One night, I'm sitting here when the phone rings at about 3 a.m., and I answer, "Hello, this is Draven at the front desk. How can I help you?" The voice on the other end sounded female, but was totally garbled, and the only bit I could make out was 23rd floor. I tried to tell the person I couldn't understand them, and asked what apartment they were in, but again, garbled response and 23rd floor. After the third time of trying to understand them and getting the same response, I said since I couldn't understand them, I'd have them come up to meet me in the hallway. So I go to the main elevators, and both are up on the, surprise, 23rd floor. Luckily, we have an older service elevator, and it's only on the 7th floor, so I call it down. I get it and hit the button for the 23rd floor, but it won't move and the inner door won't close, so I go to unlock the reset panel and boom, we start going up. Door still open. I'm freaking out, and the elevator is shaking because it goes pretty fast and it's old. As I'm going up, I just stay towards the back and finally I reach floor 23. I step out, door closes just fine, and I look around the hallway. There's nobody around. I walk along slowly trying to listen for anyone awake who might have called, but there's nothing. So now I head the opposite direction and go towards where the regular elevators are, and when I get to them, they're just sitting there with their doors open. I was pretty freaked out, but I knew it could just be the elevators on the fritz, so I get in and figure I'll just reset them when I get to floor 1, when I hear the sound of the back stairwell closing. So I quickly get out and go to the stairwell, and lo and behold, no one's there, but the maintenance door to the machine room is ajar, and at that time, I'm the only one in the building with the key. At the top of the building is a large machine room housing all the really, really loud machinery that does stuff in the building and allows access to the roof. I don't like going into it because it's creepy as heck, and no one ever goes in there. So at this point, I'm seriously freaked out, but I muster up and head in. I shout, "Hello?" And there's no response. The lights in this room flicker because they're crappy fluorescent, so I can't see well either. But at the end of the room, I can make out the roof access door, and sure as heck, it's slightly open. So I slowly continue forward, checking the space in between each machine as I walk by. And there's no one there, so I open the roof access door. I can't see anyone ahead of me on the roof, but there is a slight wraparound, and if there was a jumper or something, I needed to be sure, so I step out and leave the door ajar just like it was. Almost immediately, the door is pulled shut. Now, I might have written it off as wind or something, but this door is hard to shut and hard to open. Really hard. I immediately grab the handle and yank it open, slam it behind me, and run straight for the maintenance door. It automatically locks when it's closed, so I slam it shut too and go back to the 23rd floor hallway, get into an elevator, door still open, and go all the way down to the first floor. I go back to the main lobby, and as soon as I sit down, the phone rings. I pick it up, don't say a word, and sure as heck, garbled voice again, only audibly saying 23rd floor. I hung up the phone, turned the ringer off, and spent the rest of the evening just staring at the parking garage security monitor. There's been a bunch of creepy things happen at this building. It's basically like the Overlook Hotel at night. I walked past a dark room here on the first floor once and swore I saw myself standing inside it. The next night, as I'm inside said room cleaning, the lights flip off and I turn around to see a quick flash of myself walking past. TLDR, creepy ghost or some crap played games with me at work by trying to lure me onto the roof of the building. I knew my uncle had died. My mom had called me and told me the news. It was very sad. She told me in the middle of work and I told one of my coworkers. He expressed his condolences on my loss. A couple weeks later, my sister mentioned my aunt and uncle doing something. I said, but he's dead. And my sister said, no, he wasn't. I called my mom. No, he wasn't dead. To this day, I'm still not sure how much of it my brain imagined and how much of it was real. Did I really talk to my coworker? Was I even on the phone with my mom at all that day? It still freaks me out knowing that my mind could fabricate so complete and real a memory like that. This happened to my dad, so it's not exactly a personal story. Anyway, my dad was driving down a long, lonely highway in Ohio, doing about 90 in a Z28 with a radar detector. Rolling hills and whatnot meant that cops could hide at the bottom before you could see them and slow down. So, all of a sudden, his radar detector starts blaring and he slams on the brakes. Right over the hill, there's a squad car running radar. He's super relieved, but when he looks at the detector, it's not even on the windshield. It was unplugged and in the glove compartment. What the heck? TLDR, ghost radar detector kept my dad from getting a ticket. Posted this in a previous sub a while back, but I'll post it again as it fits here too. I had just turned 22 and my parents had sold their house and purchased a place out in the country. On the property, there was a big shed not far from the house that I decided to turn into my place. Now, I felt kind of uncomfortable in the shed, but sometimes my dog kept me company, so it wasn't so bad. Anyway, I had been in there maybe 2 weeks, and one night I'm on the computer, my dog asleep at my feet, and I need to pee, so I get up and go outside to pee. It's a beautiful, clear night, and the stars were incredible. Next thing I hear the shed door slam behind me. I turn immediately and try to open it, but it won't budge. Now, from the inside the shed, I can hear my dog start to growl, quietly at first, then louder. Now he's barking, and I'm panicking trying to get the door open. I must mention that I'm 6'5" and well-built, play sports, etc., but even ramming my full weight into the door won't open it, and I'm really panicking now as my dog's barks turn into whines, then whimpering, then silence, and with all my might, I slam into the door and it flies open. The light is off inside now, and it's pitch black. It won't turn back on, and I'm in complete darkness. Can't see my dog anywhere, and I stumble around trying to find a torch. Finally, I find it, and pick it up, and turn on my torch, and I wasn't prepared for what I'd see next. My dog had literally squashed itself into the furthest, darkest corner of the room, eyes closed and shaking violently. I immediately moved towards him, and as soon as I got within reach of him, he leapt at me into my arms and wouldn't move. I picked him up and swear I've never ran so fast in my goddamn life. I never stepped foot in that shed ever again, and my dog wouldn't even go near that part of the property. I don't know what happened in that shed that night, but I'll never forget it. Have a few, but this one stands out. I was catching a SkyTrain in one particular city about 15 minutes from where I get off. While I wait, there's a woman with glazed eyes asking people for money. She came up to me, stopped briefly, and asked, "Excuse me, could you spare some money? My brother is in the hospital and I'd like some money to buy him some flowers." That's rich, I thought. Drug addicts are getting more and more obvious with their lines. Here's $5. Gave it to her without even looking her in the face, convinced of her intentions. Anyways, my train pulls up and I get on. I look through the glass at her, walking around asking others for money as the train pulls away. The train arrives at the station 15 minutes later, and I walk down and out to the bus stop. There's only one bus the direction I'm going, and just my luck, it is there waiting when I get off the train. So on the bus, I hop and wait for the bus driver to finish reading his paper before the doors close and we embark down the highway. About 5 to 10 minutes traveling, the driver pulls over for a routine stop. The doors open, and to my complete astonishment, the woman from the SkyTrain walks into the bus, a dozen roses in hand. She looks me right in the eyes as she walks past to take her seat. How in the blue heck did she get there? I took the train before her. I watched her at the train stop from inside as we pulled away. I went over a river. I caught the first and only bus going this particular direction, and not only did she beat me there, she had time to go to a store and buy a dozen roses. To this day, I have no idea how this happened. A little backstory. I was a total idealist back in high school, so when choosing a college, I chose to go somewhere that none of my friends were attending, so that I could strike out on my own in a finding myself sort of way. Well, I ended up making a few really close friends my first semester. I mean, these guys became like a family to me in a matter of months. One day during winter break, one of those guys, my buddy Kimbo, had gone back home to visit friends and family, and on his return trip to our college, he hit a bad patch of ice and got into a car accident and was killed. It hurt like a son of a gun for a long time, and I still think about him all the time. But anyways, a few weeks after Kimbo's accident, me and the rest of the guys were getting back from a party off campus, and as we were standing outside our dorm building smoking a cig, I felt my phone vibrating, and when I pulled it out, I saw that I was getting a call from Kimbo's phone. Dumbfounded, I showed my friends the phone quickly and then answered. When I picked up, it just went directly to his voicemail, which played the same message it always had. It never happened again, and we never really talked about it, but for me, it was one of those someone's looking after me moments. I hadn't been doing very well after his death, but seeing his name show up on my cell phone screen one final time made me feel a whole lot better for a time and really helped me get out of the slump I was in. I have no idea how his phone could have possibly called me, and I doubt I ever will, but this was one glitch in the Matrix that I'll forever be thankful for. Rest in peace, Kim. But feel free to call again. When I was like 10 or 11, I was going to the beach with my aunt and her friends. There were 2 cars of us. To get there, we had to go through a very large industrial area. We didn't know the direction, so our car was following the other. Suddenly, they did an unexpected turn, and so our driver had to take a sharp bend. In that moment, we heard a very clear, loud voice inside the car saying, laughing, "Sharp bend, The driver immediately hit the brakes. We looked at each other, puzzled. We all recognized it as a voice not belonging to any of us. In the very same time, we noticed that the other car stopped as well. The other driver got out of the car with a scared face and shouted to us, Did you hear that as well?" They heard the very same thing inside their car. The area around was fully deserted. Edit. Wow, thanks for the interest. A little bit of background. This happened in central Italy in the early 90s. My aunt used to act all the time, and most of the other guys were theater actors. The voice scared the crap out of us because it was very clear, near but not coming from a direction within the car you could distinguish, nor front nor rear. Inside the car, but from no distinct place. It was like mocking us. We were scared, but soon someone started to say, "Hey, which one of you did that?" Remember, these were comedy actors who used to do any sort of strange voice. This was till we noticed the other car stopping and saw the look of the guy driving that car. They were all as scared as us and told us we heard this scary voice inside our car and told the very same words we just heard. We were there on a hot day under the sun in an area with large streets and absolutely nothing and no one around us. No cars, no people, no buildings. We never figured out what happened. One night, I had a dream about being in a car with my sister at the church we went to. For some reason, it started going out of control, so I jumped to the wheel and tried to keep us from dying. Later, I told my sister about the dream, and she had the exact same dream, but instead she was the one at the wheel and not me. About a year ago, I had a terrible nightmare. It started off me waking up in bed during a thunderstorm. As the room illuminated again and again from the flashes of lightning outside, I realized that the bed I was laying in wasn't mine. The head of the bed was against the wall the door was located on, and from my perspective, I couldn't tell if it was open or closed. That is, until I saw the face. At first, just the nose and jaw broke past the doorframe, but then an entire face slowly passed through the doorway. I tried to yell, "Who the heck are you? Where the heck am I?" But it felt like I had lost my voice. No matter how hard I tried to scream, nothing came out and this person continued to enter the room, looking dead ahead away from me. Then, just as the person was completely into the room, their head snapped towards me and it locked eyes with mine. I tried to get out of the bed, but felt completely paralyzed. The person started making their way to me, but with every step their body contorted in ways that would break a normal person's bones. Their necks snapped so the back of their head touched their back. Their jaw laid flat on their chest. Their arms had broken at the shoulders and migrated to their back like wings. Just terrifying things. And just before they reached me, I woke up. The next day I told my mom about it and went into a great deal about the room. Turns out it was almost an exact copy of my room when I was a baby. We moved out of that house when I was super young. I have no idea what the insides to any room look like. Just kinda weird, I guess. Edit. So I guess I have sleep paralysis. Cool. As I'm typing this, I already feel deja vu. I've always wanted to share this part of my life with someone, but have never been able to. So I'll just tell a bunch of people on the internet. One day I was walking to work and all of a sudden had an urge to walk a different path than usual. I work downtown in a big city. It was a strange spur-of-the-moment urge to walk a different way that changed my life forever. I turned into an alley I had never seen before. As I remember it, I made it about 15 feet or so when an actual glitch happened. Everything in my mind scrambled. I felt like I didn't have a body anymore, just that I was a semi-conscious entity floating through some weird dimension. All of a sudden, in the array of different colors and shapes, a vision came to me. It was a bunch of strange-looking people that in my mind resembled businessmen in suits. They looked startled and panicked that I could see them. One of the people made a quick movement and everything turned to black. When I regained normality, I was on a completely different street. It was the same street that I always used to walk to work. I felt sick and severely disturbed/depressed. I've never done any hard drugs, never experienced any hallucinations, never have had anything like this happen to me. The weird thing is, when the glitch was correcting itself and I could see those people watching me like a caged animal, I had the feeling that I knew I was being controlled. It still bothers me very much to this day. TLDR, had a moment of spontaneity, caused a real-life glitch, life has seemed different ever since. During a spinal tap procedure, I was put under. While under the anesthetics, I had what I can only explain as an out-of-body experience, seeing as how my viewpoint was from above my body, looking down on the procedure. I watched the whole thing and saw that the doctor knocked my Game Boy off the tabletop while walking by, batteries ejecting from the fall. One fell in sight and he picked it up, but the other was next to the front left wheel under the bed out of his view. But not mine. I woke up groggy and told him where my other battery was, and he was shocked when he found it there. To this day, it still weirds me out. When I was a teenager, I had 2 really intense dreams one night. The first one was about an online friend of mine calling me to say she'd broken up with a boyfriend, and I sang a few lines of Seal's Don't Cry to her over the phone. The second dream was finding a real-life friend's dead body floating in her bathtub. I didn't think anything of it up until I logged on that evening, and the online friend came online to tell me her boyfriend broke up with her. I immediately asked if I could call her, and she said no. I remember thinking that it meant something, like I could change it. Not long after, my phone rang, and it was the real-life friend from the dream calling me. I was completely freaked out at this point, but talked to her normally. She was just talking about school and things. Up until I realized I heard a splash in the background. I asked her, "Are you in the tub?" And when she said yes, I felt like my heart had stopped. I asked her, "What did you do?" She didn't answer me right away. And then after a very long pause, she told me she'd taken an entire bottle of pills and chased it with mushrooms and vodka. She'd gotten scared waiting for it to hit her, so she called me so she could hear someone's voice. I hung up and called 911. By the time they got there, she was unconscious but alive. Today, she's a mom to a beautiful little girl, and she's okay. About a year ago, my girlfriend and I went to eat dinner at Chipotle's. It's in a smallish shopping area with the burger joint and payway neighboring the Chipotle, one of those kind of upper-classy type shopping areas. We pulled into the parking lot in front of the establishments at around 5 p.m. on a Friday evening to find an empty parking lot. There were no tables outside, there were no cars in the parking spots, not a person in sight, and even the lights inside the buildings were off. Completely confused, I took the car in a sort of loop around the building in order to leave. The only thing of interest was a single fire truck parked alongside the building, headlights on but no emergency lights, and no one in the truck. It struck us a little odd. Maybe a fire in the building? As we pull around the backside of the building and then finish looping around, we drive past the front facade of the building. Except this time, every parking spot is full, tables are outside with patrons at them, food half-eaten. There's people walking around, and the lights inside the buildings are all on. But the fire truck was gone. Mind you, it took less than 30 seconds to make a circle around the building. Easily one of the strangest things I've ever experienced. More Adjustment Bureau than Matrix glitchy. I've posted this before elsewhere, but here goes. Sorry, this is a long read. I'm from Finland, and that's also where these things I'm about to describe to you happened. This was some years ago, pre-smartphone GPS era. It was the end of the summer, and myself and 2 friends were on a camping trip way up in the north in Lapland. The mosquito season was over, and the weather was cooling down in anticipation of the coming fall. The 3 of us had packed food and gear for a 10-day trek. The car we arrived in had been left at the parking lot of a visitor center. This happened within the premises of the Urho-Kekkonen National Park, a 985 square mile stretch of wilderness near the Russian border. The terrain there varies greatly, from treeless and semi-mountainous to dense forest of spruce and pine and dwarf birch. There are lots of swamps. Seeing reindeer is not uncommon, and some nights you might hear wolves in the distance. You could run into a bear or a wolverine in this place, but of course normally they avoid people. We mostly camped in a tent, but some nights we used shelters and simple huts provided for travelers free of charge. The trip had lasted 5 days. We were at the furthest of any kind of civilization when we were going to be on that particular outing, truly in the middle of nowhere. There really is nothing there. There are no villages, towns, or industry. The place is a national park after all. Seeing other hikers happen from time to time, you'd see some people in the distance maybe. Very rarely would you come face to face with anyone. So, in the middle of our trip, we were camped in a small clearing, woodland extending around us for a considerable distance in all directions. It was already dark, we had eaten our evening meal, and all 3 of us were jammed in our only tent. It was a bit cramped, but we fit. We took turns carrying it during the hikes. We were just exchanging some jokes and crude humor in the dark, like guys in their 20s do, about to go to sleep in our sleeping bags. When we quieted down, we began to hear it, talking, and the sound of machinery. Given our location, this was profoundly weird. We camped in a tent because there were no huts nearby. Maybe there was another camp somewhere near us? We couldn't quite make out what was being said, but it was a human voice, no doubt about it. But nothing really could explain the sound of heavy machinery. It sounded like an excavator or a tank, something big, powerful, and really not too far away. Combined with the sound of talking, we thought construction yard. But at that time of night, in an unpopulated protected nature reserve, we got out of our tent. It was cold and pitch black. The campfire had some coals still glowing. We took out our flashlights. My 2 buddies have always been a lot braver than me. The sound was clearly coming from the north, maybe half a kilometer away. We thought the construction might be going on behind a small hill some distance away. We could see no lights or anything. We still could not make out what was being said. The speaking-like voice was monotonous, and it was impossible even to say what language was being used. Still sounded a lot like a person speaking, though. You may be aware of the sort of spooky phenomenon of hearing a human voice in static. Maybe you've used a blow dryer and been sure someone is talking, turn it off and it was just something the brain tried to interpret from the steady hum. Maybe it was sort of like that, it's hard to explain. The machinery-like sound continued, not loud, but you could sort of make out the powerful engine, at times accelerating or adding power, at times at idle. My two friends resolved to go find out what was going on. We put our warm clothes back on, donned boots, and I sat next to the dying fire, adding some more wood to it. I would stay at camp while my buddies left to check out this mystery construction yard in the middle of nowhere in the Lapland woods. So there I sat. The guys took out their maps, took a compass heading out, and left. I could hear them make their way through the forest and see the light fading from their flashlights. Then they were gone. The weird sounds continued, unaltered. They were gone 15 minutes, then maybe 30, then the better part of an hour. It was odd, judging by the volume of the sound. They should have reached it, checked it out, and been back already. I added more firewood and tried to make out what the person talking was saying, but it was too tinny and obscure. The guys had been away for over 2 hours. I figured they had stayed for coffee with the construction guys or something. Then, the sound stopped. Just like that. It just ended all at the same time. The engine sound and the voice both just quit. It was very silent. I waited for another 30 minutes, very worried now that something bad had happened, that maybe my friends were lost. Should I go and try to find them? I shouted their names several times and built the fire pretty big. I was scared out of my mind when suddenly I saw the flashlights of my friends. Apparently they were returning in a hurry. The guys got back to camp out of breath. They told me the following. They had followed the sound beyond the small ridge in the distance. There was nothing there, and it seemed like they were not getting any closer to the source of the sounds. They had to stop every now and again, be quiet, and listen to it to be able to walk towards it. They walked and stopped like this for some time, then realized they were not getting any closer. The sounds did not change in volume at all. They decided to go just a bit further several times, when suddenly the sound just stopped like someone pressed a button on a recording. They realized they had been going on for a long time. They were in the middle of the dark woods, alone. They reversed the heading and started back at a brisk pace. Eventually, they saw my huge fire from the top of a hill and found their way back. The weird thing is, we seemed to think the sound stopped at different times. They had been gone 2.5 hours in total. They said the sound stopped at around the 1 hour 15 minute mark after they left. Then they started to head back immediately, return trip taking a bit longer, even though they kept a good pace. They apparently wandered around for a bit. For me, the sound stopped at the 2 hour mark, just 30 minutes before they returned. We did not sleep that night. Nothing more on that trip happened, and we never found out what the weird construction yard-like sound was about. When we returned to the park's visitor center some 5 days later, we asked around, but no one knew of any ongoing construction taking place in the whole national park area. It's been bugging me ever since.
Cops of Reddit. What's the stupidest thing or crime someone did right in front of you? I worked as a small-town sheriff's deputy in a rural country. One night, I was running code to a domestic disturbance at a home a couple miles away. I was cresting a hill and noticed a pair of headlights in my lane of travel on a 2-lane road. I pulled up and noticed a beat-up old yellow pickup truck with the driver's side door open facing me and blocking the road. I then noticed a disheveled-looking man standing in the ditch, sheepishly holding an obviously upset raccoon by the tail. I stepped out of the car and yelled to the man politely, inquiring as to what was happening. He shrugged his shoulders and yelled, "Sorry, forensic Sasquatch," before pitching the raccoon into the bushes. I didn't have time to ask questions, but told him to move the car out of the way so I could get to my domestic. Months later, I ran into the gentleman in town, and he introduced himself as the raccoon guy. I asked him what had happened, and he told me, "I was driving along and saw 2 raccoons trying to get into the same culvert, and they got stuck. I told myself, I'll bet I could grab one of them if I tried, and went and grabbed him by the tail. Ooh, boy, was he sure mad." I asked him what he was planning to do with the raccoon, and he just shrugged and gave me a quizzical look. My roommate was a cop. We were walking home after work. I passed right by the station on my way home, and she'd usually join me. She was still in uniform, badge and all. We passed by a liquor store, and a group of kids surrounded us and asked us to buy them liquor. She said, "How old are you?" They said, 16. That's why we can't buy it ourselves. She asked them after she arrested them why they'd approach a uniformed police officer of all people. Their answer, "We didn't think you were a real cop because you're a woman." Wow! So these children must be very educated. Someone please cue the Curb Your Enthusiasm theme song as they're all just being arrested and handcuffed behind them. Bum, bum, bum. You kids are dumb and you're going to jail. You're going to be in juvie with the record. Oh, geez. So many. Probably the guy who asked me how much illegal substances I wanted to buy. I was in full uniform, but he was looking down, counting the rocks in his palm at night. I laughed and said, I'll take all of it. He said, that's going to be like $50 then. As he looked up at me, realizing the error in his ways upon seeing me, he ate them all. He got out of going to jail right then, but got a warrant for destroying evidence and a ride to the hospital to have his stomach pumped. So, kind of worth it for him, I guess. We just went through this literally last time. Bum, bum, bum. You're not going to jail, but you're going to go in the hospital having your stomach pumped because you are stupid. Part of my Joker laugh there. Driving down a two-way road, one lane each way, car up ahead of me on my lane makes a U-turn from the curb. He was parked. Then proceeds to swerve towards my lane, driving on the wrong side of the road. I slow down. He honks at me as if I'm in his way. He swerves back to his lane and keeps driving. I stop him ultimately after he hit the curb trying to pull over. Yup, guess who got a DUI? Not a cop, but I was behind the Dumbo who did it in front of the cop. Near my mom's house is a bunch of horse property, so it's normal to see guys go by on their horses. I was behind a black SUV and see a police car parked facing the street. The Dumbo in the SUV slowed down just to veer closer and rev his engine at the horses. One was calm, but the other was freaking out. The cop's sirens came on so fast, it surprised me. Guy got his horse under control, and the Dumbo in the SUV got pulled over. I deal with stupid every day at work, but here's one that I always like to tell. Back when I was working gang units, we were in a residential neighborhood in East LA at night. We hear a car do a huge, long burnout. It sounded really close. We turned off our lights and waited for some weapon fire, but never heard any. Just then, a car goes flying by us. We turn on the lights and go after him. He pulls over right away and starts apologizing to us, saying that his foot slipped off the clutch. Yeah, right. A burnout that long and your foot slipped? Turns out, he just broken up with his girlfriend and he went to her house to do the burnout in front of it. Now, the interesting thing about working gangs is we don't do traffic or answer calls unless it is gang related. We muck with gang members. But we had to stop because of what he did in the neighborhood we were in. Since this guy wasn't a gang member, we were just going to let him go. We hadn't even run his license or even asked for it yet. Now here is where it gets stupid. He looks at us and says, "Can I ask you something before you take me to jail?" My partner and I look at each other, ask him for his ID, and run it. Turns out, he had a $15,000 warrant for his arrest. He was seconds away from going home and ended up in jail that night. Funny thing is, I don't think he ever asked the question. I was military police, and this happened back in 2012. I was doing a routine building check on one of the schools on base. Due to our security posture that day, I was in full battle rattle and had my piece with me at 6'2" and 220 pounds. I am an enormous person with all that body armor and such on. I turn the corner to check the backside of the school and see two teenagers sitting on a picnic table outside one of the doors. Mind you, this is a Saturday, so there's nobody in the building. The kid sees me, a giant wall of weaponry, and immediately throws something under the little PE shed. My first thought was the leaf. We're on a military base, you can't have that crap. So I asked the kid what he just threw, and he immediately starts crying. The girl he was with had such a bewildered look in her face at the sight of him breaking down like that. Admittedly, I was also a bit surprised. The girl was 16 and the guy was 15. She told me that it was just a cigarette, so I made the boy fish it out from under the shed. Sure enough, it was just a Camel Crush cig. Not even broken yet. "Are your parents home?" I asked the boy. He shook his head. You live on base, right? Go smoke these in your dad's garage. It's Saturday anyway. Why are you here in school property?" "I'm not going to arrest you." Suddenly he stopped crying and started praising me for being the coolest cop ever and thanking me for not bringing him in, as if smoking a cig was a huge deal on a military base full of nuclear weapons. Later that day, coincidentally, also on school building check, I found two 14-year-old boys sitting against the wall eating honeysuckle flower petals. So that was weird. I was out at a client's site to burn some camera footage for the police, and due to the slow DVD burner, I found myself outside having a smoke break with the detective that came to collect it. We were shooting the crap back and forth about the weather when a homeless guy walked up and asked for a light. Duct tape jacket and shoes? Check. Overpowering smell of mold, waste, and burning tires? Check. While I was doing the mental math of, is this guy likely to try a runner with my Zippo in front of a cop? The detective produced a book of matches and told him to keep them. The homeless guy walked 10 feet away to an illegally parked Crown Vic belonging to the cop, sat on the hood, and started emptying his pockets. An illegal substance pipe, 2 Bic lighters, 1 crushed pack of illegal substances, and a handful of plastic baggies. Detective elbowing me and whispering, "He's lucky I have places to be." Finally, the guy found what he was looking for, a pathetic little pinner of an herbal leaf, wedged in the cigarette pack and lit up using one of the lighters. Detective still whispering, "Bet he doesn't even share." I let out a snort, which the homeless guy apparently didn't appreciate. He looked straight at me, then straight at the cop, and the flash would have lost to this 90-pound white dude in duct tape shoes. He was half a block away and around the corner before his rolled-up leaf stopped rolling around on the sidewalk. I was training a rookie. We were the same unit with the same designator, a radio call sign. I called dispatch my police radio. 240 Alpha is what I said, indicating that we, 240 Alpha, were calling dispatch. My rookie was standing directly next to me, like right beside me. He got on the radio and said, 240 Alpha, go ahead. Thinking the dispatcher was calling him. In short, he answered himself on the radio. The dispatcher was confused. I wonder how long they kept him like that after he said what he said. I just want to know if they were just staring at him the whole while. "Oh boy, this isn't good. Dispatcher's gone quiet. What do we do, sir?" "I don't know. Why don't you ask him again? And just may I remind you, do you see this piece of paper?" "Yeah." What does it say right there?" 240 Alpha. Yeah, I know." "Uh-huh. And do you see the names beneath that?" "Well, hey, wait a minute. That's my name." "Oh, that's my name." "Yeah, that's your name." My agency is the primary agency responsible for boat patrol in my area. One July weekend, my partner and I are just beginning an afternoon shift on the water when another boater flags us down. We make our way over, expecting them to be having mechanical trouble or something. Nope. 2 guys on board, and the operator tells us he wants us to write him a ticket for his expired registration. Says he was just given a warning last weekend and knew we'd catch him anyway. So, might as well get it over with. Pretty good, right? Not done. Eventually, we put our boat on the lift and get off the water to grab dinner. While eating, we get a call from dispatch that a boater had just called in a complaint about another boat that was operating dangerously and nearly caused an accident. We make our way back there, and sure enough, it's the boat from earlier. Turns out they'd asked us to write them a ticket earlier because they thought that would keep us from stopping them later after they had gotten intoxicated. Didn't want that OWI. And still not done. This time, when we stopped them, there was an additional person on board, an intoxicated girl that they allowed to operate their boat. We check her ID, says she's 22, but can't get a return on it. It's fake. She's underage, and they knew it. Now she's going to jail for OWI, among other things, and they're getting charged with furnishing alcohol to a minor. Good thing they got that registration ticket out of the way earlier. I am completely unsurprised. Just about every boater at the marina I live near are alcoholics that do stupid crap just like this. My mother does security at an abandoned waterfront hotel, and every single freaking time she has to tell half those boaters, abandoned private property for your own safety, there's no trespassing, even though they've been there 15 times before, just because they were too crap-faced last time to remember. And every time they're like, "What? Really? No way!" Like they can't believe the place is dangerous, even though the place is literally falling in on itself. There was this one guy who would stand on property and talk to her for 5 to 15 minutes, despite being told to leave and getting no reception from her. Then she called 911 after watching him book it from one of the rooms and finding a lab inside. Since she knew him, she was able to point to which boat he lived in, and he was getting arrested. He was like, "But I thought we were cool!" No, not even a little bit. Especially not cover up your illegal substance lab and probably become a felon in the process. Cool. Not a cop, but I saw it happen. I worked at a pretty busy nightclub and I watched a man pick up a woman's purse and walk away with it, out toward the parking lot. I saw him get into the passenger side of a vehicle by himself with the purse. I informed one of the off-duty police officers that we'd hire for security. The officer approached the vehicle and turns his flashlight on to catch the guy in the middle of taking a Snapchat video of himself chugging cheap vodka. Turns out, it was his cousin's purse and he needed the car keys. Stupid thing is it was dollar drink night, so how much was he really even saving? At least he got a good Snapchat out of it. Not a cop, but one day a massive water main burst in town and knocked out a couple streets. They put the cops in the ends to make sure nobody went down them. I was driving on a late afternoon and nobody else was really around, so pretty quiet. A young female cop was standing on the corner when over the road from her, some guy wandering down the street jumps up and starts swinging from the road closure sign and then pulled it down. The look on her face was one of pure, "Are you freaking kidding me right now?" Drove off before anything else happened, but I imagine that went poorly for him. 2 of my cousins are in their last year of cop school, so this summer they visited us from the city, and my dad took them fishing at the local lake. Some tourists in an RV were camped illegally, doesn't bother us locals since it is out of the way, and hadn't had any luck fishing. They saw the catch my dad was carrying and asked if they could buy it. He said he could give it to them for free since we already had dinner. The tourists then gave my dad at least 5 big cartons of cigarettes as payment. And it is almost 100% smuggler goods from the border. My dad turned around and saw my 2 cousins literally sitting on the ground laughing. My partner was writing a ticket while I was documenting the stop via the patrol car's computer. We were on a city street next to a dramatically curved freeway off-ramp. We hear a tremendously loud screeching of brakes and a crashing sound that went on for a few seconds. We turn around and an SUV is on its roof. A tire is rolling across the intersection. We put it out over the air and run over. I looked inside my flashlight, and there were multiple bodies all over the SUV. The fire department arrived and cut them out. They were all badly injured, and the driver was gone. Drive safe and pay attention, guys. There's a reason my partner was writing a freaking speeding ticket. Not a cop, but was a teenager who did something stupid. My buddy and I were at a stoplight in Princeton, New Jersey, one summer evening, and a town cop pulls up next to us, and for some unknown reason, I turned to my buddy and said, "Hey Dave, put away that illegal substance pipe." Needless to say, we get immediately pulled over and 3 more cops come rolling up. Not hard. We were also 50 yards from the police station. My buddy's car was registered in PA, so it was extra special for the cops. Neither my buddy nor the cops were terribly happy with me that day. After a thorough search of our persons and the car, where nothing illegal was found, the cop turns to me and says, "In the future, you should make sure your hummingbird rump doesn't get in the way of your crocodile mouth." I still laugh about it to this day. This was sometime around 1992. Opposite side of the story, officer pulled me over for driving through downtown with my brights on at 2 a.m. Intoxicated, I reach out to turn them off. As he told me why he pulled me over, I hit my windshield washers instead and sprayed him. He let me go, but he followed me as I drove around the block to drop off a buddy. Pulled in behind my friend's car so he can go home. He literally falls out of my car, beer in hand, 6-pack in the other. Lights come on, and the cop gets out and approaches us. Turns out my buddy was his training officer. Lets us both go with the promise that we aren't going anywhere until we sober up. I walked across the street to a friend's place. Cop leaves. Buddy takes off. Not really a cop, but maybe the cop who handled me will remember this story. Picked up Call of Duty at a GameStop, which was quite a drive away from me, and I wasn't too familiar with the area. The main street had a ton of traffic, so I decided to use side streets without looking at my GPS and ended up driving into what looked like an abandoned factory. Had no clue where I was, but I drove slowly past the open gate, which appeared unattended at the moment, and attempted to make a U-turn back out. Right as I'm about to exit, the cop holds out his hand and yells, "Hey you! What do you think you're doing?" I had no clue where I was, but I knew I mucked up. I rolled down the window and the officer, in a very distinct Australian accent, says, "So, you enjoy running stop signs?" Had no clue there was a stop sign, but I didn't make a complete stop, so I just felt a huge fine coming my way. Told him I had no clue where I was and that I was really sorry. I just wanted to play some video games, man. He goes on to tell me that I was in the DWP, Department of Water and Power, and if I drove any further down, the guards were authorized to shoot me and that I could have been terminated since they were on red alert. After he asks me to pull over and check my license plate, make and model, etc., he tells me that they'll send my info to the FBI and look for any infractions or criminal records. None, by the way, but okay. Told him again I was sorry, and dude just kept saying, "Leave, leave, leave." I feel for the man because I'm sure he might have lost his job, but he let me go with a slap on the wrist and my body intact. Got extremely lucky, and now I always use GPS if I'm not at least 75% familiar with the area. Hope he's doing well, I owe him. But I swear something felt off, but in the heat of the moment I was honestly dumbfounded. He seemed more annoyed of me and couldn't wait for me to leave, but I don't really know what was happening on his end. That quote about getting shot at stuck with me as he explicitly told me I'd be terminated. And I don't usually hear cops talk about the FBI investigating, but this is government property, so, I just rolled with it. Also, that Call of Duty died out in a month. It was World War II. Overall, not a worthwhile game. What? That's what you got out of this whole scenario? You were threatened that you were going to get shot by a very angry Australian man who was dressed as a police officer and talking about the FBI and how you could have lost your life. But the last thing that you threw in there is, well, the worst part is that Call of Duty sucked. What? I would say I'm just glad that you're alive. As a teenager, my friend and I were jaywalking. We got to the center divider when a cop drove by, then made a U-turn, and we stupidly started running and ran up into a parking structure. We were on the roof when 3 cop cars came up, surrounded us with weapons drawn, telling us to put our hands up. They asked why we ran, and we said we didn't know, which we really didn't. We just ran. They searched us, and I had some candy in my pocket, which they asked what I was holding. It was gummy bears. They let us go with a warning. I thought I was pretty stupid. Man, how terrible would it be if the cops were like, "And we're going to take this under suspicious activity. Make sure that these gummies aren't filled with anything illegal." Yeah. All right, be on your way.
Guys, look, I just got free candy.
When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.